Chapter 767. Junemo and Yi Su were both proud and powerful people. However, no one knew whether they were powerful because of their pride or because they were powerful. 2 years ago, they met in the Lank Temple in the autumn rain. They fought each other proudly and did not look at the rain or the sword. But because of the Buddhism sect, they did not enjoy themselves. Today, they met again and each made a sword move, sharing the autumn scenery in front of the verdant canyon. The third sword was about to come. It was just the third sword. It seemed that the battle had just begun. But both the two people fighting and the hundreds of thousands of people watching in the field felt that this was the sword that would decide life and death. 18 years ago in the wilderness, at the other end of the Black Line, because of the son of Yama, Yi Su's Taoist heart was stimulated and he used the most powerful sword move in his youth. He cut the small tree into 53,333 pieces. After that, he traveled around various countries and his state increased again. The wooden sword in his hand became slower and slower. In an instant, thousands of swords became thousands, hundreds, and finally only one sword. Because one sword was enough. As the autumn wind blew, the chi of heaven and earth in front of the verdant canyon seemed to be attracted by the wooden sword and rushed in from all directions. The sunlight falling from the sky was refracted into strange shapes, as if thousands of horses were galloping. Frightened by this, countless golden rice grains were blown away by the wind, heading north. A golden wave was born in the field, and the wooden sword moved between the rice waves like a swift boat. Yi Su did not stay there. His clothes fluttered and he followed the wooden sword. The golden waves pushed the boat-like wooden sword. Under the influence of the majestic chi of heaven and earth, it became faster and faster. It was about to become a flash of lightning. But Yi Su's figure always followed the sword's shadow. No one could fly so fast. Riding on a sword was just a legend. To be more precise, except for the headmaster, there was no such legend in the world. Yi Su was not riding on a sword. The wooden sword was the boat. He was on the boat. The boat carried him. He was not the one pushing the boat. There was a strong wind in the rice field. Yi Su disappeared. The next moment, he came to Junemo. He held the handle of the wooden sword. He bent his knees, lowered his waist, straightened his elbow, and did not turn his wrist. The wooden sword pierced Junemo's left chest. An incomparably bright and wholly divine light shone on the blade of the sword. The sun above the verdant canyon seemed to dim a little when he struck with his sword. It was not Tianqi, but the fusion of the sword and heaven and earth. He had transformed Haotian's will into his own sword will. This was the will of the heavens. The wooden sword contained heaven's will. How could he avoid it? The wooden sword that contained the will of heaven was even harder to answer than the iron sword from before. Life and death could be ignored, but heaven's will could not be avoided. Junemo remembered the sentence his teacher had repeated many times. There was no omniscient and omnipotent existence except for Haotian. He knew that he could not avoid Yi Su's sword, so he did not dodge. He didn't even look at the wooden sword that was stabbing into his chest. Instead, he raised his iron sword and chopped down. Chopping was a very simple action. What he did was very simple. He just chopped down. If the question was difficult to answer, then he would not answer it. Just like the calculation problem he wrote for Chun Pippi before he entered the second floor, it was too complicated to calculate, so he did not calculate it. If the knot was difficult to untie, then he would not untie it. Just like how Teek tied his hair into a knot because the bath water was cold, it was too troublesome to untie, so he did not untie it. If the youngest brother did not answer, then he would use the sect rules to deal with him. If the seventh sister did not untie it, then he would cut it with scissors. If the wooden sword was difficult to answer, then he would not answer it. If it was difficult to avoid, then he would not avoid it. He held the iron sword, like picking up the sect rule ruler and picking up scissors, and then he chopped down. Junemo had always regarded the youngest uncle as his idol. He had not learned the Great Spirit, but he had learned the Howran sword. The Great Spirit was about moving forward bravely. The iron sword in his hand seemed to be able to lift up all the boulders in the verdant canyon. It was extremely magnificent and made people feel relaxed and happy. In front of this simple and carefree iron sword, there was no God or Buddha nor heaven. Junimo looked calm. He was confident that his iron sword could cut Yisu in half before the wooden sword reached him. This was not a mutual destruction, but a test of each other's courage. Courage was a kind of pride. Everyone knew that the second brother of the academy was the proudest person in the world. He was the bravest man in the world. The blood in the field in front of the verdant canyon and the countless cavalrymen who died under his sword had all proved this. Yisu was also very proud, because of the pride shown by Junimo at this time. He did not dodge. The wooden sword moved forward and pierced Junimo's left chest. The seemingly blunt and edgeless wooden sword instantly sank into the charred black armor. The hidden talisman lines under the armor suddenly lit up, emitting a strong aura. The iron sword fell, but did not cut Yisu's neck, because it was blocked by the scabbard on his back. In the blazing light, the seemingly inconspicuous scabbard was like a sail in the raging sea, blocking the power of the wind and giving the boat strength to move forward. The tip of the iron sword pierced into the scabbard. Because the sword was wide and straight, it could not pierce through. All of this was real, but also not real. The iron sword was not an iron sword, the wooden sword was not a wooden sword, and the scabbard was not a scabbard. The most basic structure of these things was filled with endless chi of heaven and earth. This was no longer a battle between swords, but a battle between psyche power, a battle between two worlds. Endless chi of heaven and earth violently rushed in and was instantly swallowed by an invisible vortex, entering the world of the two, and then violently exploding through the sword or the scabbard. The chi of heaven and earth in front of the verdant canyon was compressed to the extreme, and the refracted light became even more distorted. Because of the compression, the chi of heaven and earth began to rub against each other, producing scorching flames. If Yisu's sword at the beginning was like a small sun in front of the verdant canyon, then a real sun seemed to be born in front of the verdant canyon at this time. Endless light and heat sprayed into the field. What a dazzling scene it was! The hearts of those who saw this scene would sway. Unfortunately, just like when the headmaster killed a god in the wilderness because the light was too bright, few people could see this scene. Lu Bai could see it. So could Yi Hongyu. She had been silent in the sacred sedan with her head down, as if she did not care about the situation in the verdant canyon. Finally, she could not help but look up. In the light, Junmo's iron sword continued to press down. With a light hiss, the scabbard on Yisu's back was torn open. Yisu looked indifferent, and the wooden sword in his hand continued to move forward. The wooden sword shortened inch by inch, and part of it entered Junmo's chest. More of it was crushed into the finest powder, and then it burned fiercely like a candle. The current situation depended on whether the iron sword would break the sail first or the wooden sword would break the armor first. The candle would eventually turn into ashes. The burning wooden sword became shorter and shorter, but it still did not break Junmo's armor. In the blazing light, Yisu's face became transparent, and there was still no expression on it. He continued to move forward with the sword. In the end, there was only a hilt left, a bare hilt. With a clear roar, Yisu slammed the entire sword hilt into Junmo's chest. In the past, his wooden sword had no hilt or scabbard. Now, his sword had a hilt and a scabbard. Because over the years, his cultivation had been regressing. He was moving forward and backward. From 10,000 swords to one sword, from seeing through to not seeing through, from the outside world to the inside world. But in this battle today, he had been moving forward and had not taken a step back. His scabbard was the bond he had comprehended in the world. His sword hilt was all his spirit on sword Taoism. He used the scabbard to bind the edge of the iron sword, and then slapped all the sword style into Jun Mo's chest. Jun Mo's cultivation over the years was as simple as his iron sword. Forward, forward, and forward. There was no retreat and there was no return. He advanced towards the peaks one by one. Just as Yi Su slapped the hilt into his chest, he suddenly let go of the sword hilt. The iron sword was too wide and straight like his eyebrows. Could not be in the world or in the scabbard. At least in a short time, he could not break Yi Su's scabbard. Just like solving a problem, he would not break it. He let go of the sword hilt and made a concession for the first time in his cultivation. But his left foot, in the sky full of light, took a step forward. His right hand clenched into a fist, holding the infinite light in the autumn wind, and smashed toward Yi Su. Jun Mo, who was moving forward, made a concession for the first time. Yi Su, who retreated in order to advance, moved forward resolutely. The two peerless geniuses of the cultivation world, in this thrilling battle, chose the other's best method at the same time, but no one knew who would win in the end. When the sword hilt sank into the scorched black armor, a tearing sound was heard in the whole field. It seemed that the sky was torn apart by someone. Jun Mo's armor did not change much, and there were some tiny sawdust left on it. Behind him, there was an extremely terrifying sword essence. The sword style pierced into the verdant canyon, piercing a deep hole in the cliff. Just the overflowing sword style had such amazing power. What would Jun Mo, who was facing all the sword style, do? Almost at the same time, Jun Mo's fist landed on Yi Su's body. His fist held infinite light, which was the chi of heaven and earth in front of the verdant canyon. And in this chi of heaven and earth, there was an unimaginable amount of sword style. The sword style of the iron sword even contained Yi Su's own sword style. Jun Mo let go of the iron sword, and then held countless swords. When his fist landed on Yi Su's body, it felt as if 10,000 swords had landed on Yi Su's body. The spring wind blew the willows, and the thin leaves fell into the water. The morning sun rose, and the lake glowed with golden light. On the winter snow lake, the wind was like a knife. It was quiet in front of the verdant canyon. Countless pairs of eyes fell on that place again, looking nervously at the two people standing opposite them. After an unknown period of time, Yi Su suddenly coughed, and there were countless fine cuts on his plain clothes. He looked at Jun Mo and said with emotion, "If you didn't have this armor, I wouldn't have lost." There are no ifs in this world. There was no joy on Jun Mo's face, and he said indifferently, "If you want to say if, then if I don't have armor and you don't have scabbard, I win. If you don't have swords and I don't have swords, I win. If it were 18 years ago, I would have won. If it were 18 years later, I would still win." He finally said, "So no matter what, I win. There are no ifs. See you tomorrow." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 768. Yi Su asked, "Can we reach the end of the cultivation path by relying on external objects?" Second brother said, "Haotian Taoism pays attention to nature. That is wrong." Yi Su was slightly stunned and asked, "Why do you say so? What are external objects?" "If you and I are considered external objects, then the armor is an external object, the sword is an external object, and the aura between heaven and earth is an external object. However, everyone is using them." The second brother said, "Travel thousands of miles with the help of a carriage and a boat, and start farming with the help of a knife and fire. There are few differences between humans and animals, but they are good at using things. This is why humans are humans. How can they be called things?" These simple words made Yi Su ponder for a long time. Then, he sighed and said, "I originally thought that you were upright, strict, old-fashioned, and didn't know how to be harmonious. But today, I know that you're the real understanding one." Second brother said, "Propriety is reason. After careful consideration, if you decide that a rule is reasonable, You will not retreat even if there are thousands of people in front of you. That is propriety. I heard that Mr. Ku once said, I will retreat even if there are thousands of people in front of me, but I will not retreat. That's exactly what I mean. Yisu looked at him and said seriously, the Academy has always been doing things that make you happy, because you believe that these things are right. However, the truth comes from Haotian, and the reason is judged by people. Different positions will bring different rights and wrongs. How do you judge whether it is reasonable or not? You are right. Different positions will bring different rights and wrongs. But if you choose a position, the right and wrongs will naturally be determined. That is the so-called reason. Second brother said, the position of the Academy is the position of human beings. We have no love or hate for heaven and earth. We love things that are good for people, such as rice fields. We hate things that are not good for people, such as disasters. The same is true for rules. If there are benefits, we will abide by them, and if there are no benefits, we will abandon them. Yisu asked, the Academy's reason comes from the pros and cons? Second brother said, yes. Yisu said bitterly, isn't that a little too realistic? Second brother said, all the love and hate of human beings originate from reality. Yisu laughed at himself. He took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. The blood was very thick, just like the layer that settled at the bottom of the wine barrel. The second brother knew that this person was in a bad situation. Seeing that he was deep in thought, he thought about his view of life and death and Taoism. He wanted to say that if something happened, he could go to the Academy to hide. But he knew Yisu's pride, so he only said, take care. Hearing this, Yisu laughed and said with a happy expression, I've traveled around various countries and cultivated for many years. Finally, when I'm in the autumn of being crippled, I'm able to receive Jun Mo's blessing. I didn't let myself down. With that, he turned and left the verdant canyon. Second brother looked at that lonely figure and slowly inserted the iron sword in his hand into the field beside him. With this movement, countless cracks appeared on his armor, and then pieces fell off. The blackened metal fragments looked like the common broken tiles in Chang'an City. After a while, pieces of armor were piled up around second senior brother's feet, and his clothes were soaked in blood. To the north of the field was the Green Mountains and the verdant canyon, and to the south was the military camp that stretched for more than 10 miles. Yisu didn't go north or south, but east. He kept walking along the Green Mountains until he came to the Great Swamp. After passing the Great Swamp by boat, he would arrive at the Kingdom of Song and then the sea. He didn't know why he was walking in that direction, but he vaguely felt that there was something or someone in the East Sea or the Kingdom of Song that was attracting him. Somewhere in the wilderness, Yisu's path was blocked. What stopped him was a flower of blood. The ink-red robe of judgment fell quietly. Yi Hongyu asked, where are you going? Yisu looked at her and said with a smile, I lost, so I'm going to relax. Yi Hongyu said, you should know that you're seriously injured. If you don't get treated soon, it will be very troublesome. The Jisho Abbey is in the south, and the Divine Hall is in the south. Why are you going east? Although Yisu didn't see it, he guessed that the two hands in the robe of judgment had clenched into fists. He felt the anger in her heart and felt warm. He said with a smile, I've already become a cripple. How can I be cured? Yi Hongyu's fists were indeed clenched. She was indeed very angry. After hearing this, she became even angrier. She was so angry that her body trembled, and the blood-red robe fluttered in the autumn wind. He was her brother, the person she respected the most in her life, her idol, and the goal she had been chasing since childhood. She would always look at his back, wanting to catch up but never able to. Even though she had become the great divine priest of judgment, she was still the little girl who followed her brother and cried. However, at this moment, he said that he was a cripple. How could you be a cripple? How could you admit that you were a cripple so easily and calmly? Even if you can't cultivate and are ordinary from now on, you are still extraordinary. How can you be disheartened? Where did your pride and confidence go? There was no emotion on Yi Hongyu's face, but her voice was trembling. Yi Su looked at her quietly and said, I'm neither Ning Ke nor Long Qing. I have nothing to do with Yama, and Haotian will not bless me. I'm just the Yi Su who cultivated diligently and lived peacefully. That's why I'm a cripple. My snow mountain and ocean of qi have been destroyed. I'm just an ordinary person now. I know why you're angry. He continued with a smile, and his expression became very gentle. When I stopped you from killing Long Qing by the North Yen Lake, you began to suspect me, and you were angry because of my lack of courage. You are my sister, but I'm actually weaker than you. This is indeed something to be angry about. However, I have to remind you that I actually began to suspect you a long time ago, and then I failed today. At this moment, I can't help but wonder if this is Haotian's punishment for me. Yi Hongyu's expression changed slightly. Yi Su suddenly laughed and said, Why are you still thinking about these meaningless things at this moment? I had a good fight, and that's enough. Yi Hongyu said, Only victory can make me feel happy. That's you and Ning Ke, not the rest of us. Yi Su said with a smile, People like me and Jun Imo are still a bit old-fashioned after all. Yi Hongyu did not know what to say. She and Ning Ke would probably never understand why the Battle of Verdant Canyon would end up like this. Yi Su looked at the green mountains not far away and said calmly, I used to want to be famous when I was young, but I was lucky that I didn't get it. Therefore, I spent my life on the sword. In terms of swordsmanship, I can rank in the top 3 in the world. Unfortunately, all 3 of us are in this field. Failure is not scary. I've been defeated more than once over the years, but today's failure was the most thorough. However, I don't think it's sad. Instead, I think it's a good thing. Yi Su looked back at Yi Hongyu and said with a smile, The Academy is essentially the way of entering the human realm, so the way of the Academy is based on reality. Although I lost, I vaguely understand something. Lu Bai is about to fight. You should go to the Verdant Canyon to watch the battle, because this battle is very meaningful to you. What about you? From today on, I will be an ordinary person. The word sword has finally left my life. It no longer means anything to me. I will have more time to think about other things. Yi Su said, Continue to pursue the way of the sword. One day you will surpass me. In fact, I've been waiting for you to surpass me all these years. Unfortunately, I've fallen behind now. I hope you can forgive me for this matter. After saying this, he reached out with a smile and took off Yi Hongyu's divine crown. Then, he ruffled her black hair like a bird's nest, looking very childish. Yi Hongyu's body suddenly tightened. She was not used to this action. For so many years, Yi Su had never done such a tender action to her. She was very nervous, but also very warm and satisfied. So, she obediently lowered her head. Yi Su left. After a long time, Yi Hongyu raised her head, still longing for the previous feeling. She looked at the gradually disappearing figure, and the sadness in the depths of her eyes disappeared. More than 10 deacons of the Judicial Department of the West Hill Divine Palace and several West Hill Divine Guards appeared around her. Protect him, she said expressionlessly. Then, she turned around and walked toward the Verdant Canyon. She was not angry because it was a fair battle. Her brother had gotten what he wanted, so he was happy. And as Yi Su had said before he left, it was time for Lu Bai to take action. Because Jun Mo, who had just defeated Yi Su, was undoubtedly the most powerful Jun Mo, second brother sat under the canopy, quietly looking at the direction of the field. Mu Yu carefully picked out the armor pieces that were left on his body. Then, she took off her helmet and began to comb his hair again. Obviously, she was not used to it. Wang Qi held a jar of medicine in his left hand and a paper bag of white sugar in his right hand. He said, "This medicine is very strong, so it is very bitter. If you can't drink it, you can swallow it with the sugar." Second brother looked at the white sugar in his hand and said unhappily, "Life and death don't matter, not to mention bitter medicine." After saying this, he took the medicine that had been cooled to the best temperature from Wang Qi's hand and swallowed it like a warrior drinking wine. His expression did not change, but his eyebrows slightly trembled. For him to be unable to control his expression, one could imagine how unpleasant the black medicine must be to drink. Wang Qi handed over the paper bag with a bitter face. Second senior martial brother finished his candy and combed his hair into a bun. Mu Yu waved the mirror in front of him, then put it away and helped him tie the crown. The iron sword was constantly knocked on the stove, and sixth brother was sweating profusely. Mu Yu asked, "Do you want to take a break?" Second brother stood up and put on the academy uniform with her help. He said, "No, I can't." He could not rest, because he would be discouraged if he rested. He could not rest, because his opponent would not let him rest. A carriage came from the south and went straight to the verdant canyon. The carriage was very quiet. There was no coachman. He was in the carriage. "It's too late. I only wrote 1 chapter today. I still owe 7,000 words. I will write 3 chapters tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 769. The carriage stopped in the field in front of the verdant canyon. The carriage did not have to come, but it still came. This sentence had 2 meanings. The person in the carriage did not have to come, or the person's sword did not have to come, because that person's sword could reach tens of thousands of miles away. The person in the carriage was Lu Bai. He was recognized as the most powerful person in the world of cultivation and was called the Sage of Sword. He was a real powerhouse. Even those unworldly sublime beings in the unknown place were not his match. Especially when he held the sword in his hand, the area in front of him was his absolute territory. Even the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey and eldest brother could not enter. Many people, including second brother, thought that with Lu Bai's peerless talent, he could surpass the threshold of the 5 states if he wanted to. It was just that he did not want to. Lu Bai's voice came from the carriage. "Do you want to rest for a while?" Second brother looked at the carriage hundreds of feet away and tied the rope around his neck with his slender fingers. He said, "I don't know if I can still be as confident after a rest." Lu Bai said in the carriage, "Then I won't rest." Second brother said, "If I had fought with you 2 days ago, I would have lost. Thank you for waiting until now." Lu Bai said, "I also want to thank you for sparing the life of a useless disciple of the sword Garrett." The conversation in front of the verdant canyon was very calm, gentle and full of kindness. No matter how one listened, one could not feel the tension of swords drawn and life and death at any moment. There was no hatred between the academy and the sword Garrett. Although Lu Yiqing was blinded by Ning Ke, it was a fair duel. With Lu Bai's temperament and identity, he would not be angry. This was something that the academy did not understand. Second brother looked at the carriage in the field and asked, "Why did you come, sir?" The carriage was quiet. After a long time, Lu Bai's answer came. "Even the headmaster of the academy could not do it. What can I do?" Second brother was silent for a moment and said, "The headmaster is right. He is indeed not omniscient and omnipotent. He probably did not expect that after he left, the confidence in the world would be greatly weakened. Besides, I am a visiting professor of the Divine Hall." Lu Bai's voice came from the carriage. "The whole world is against the Tang Empire. As a person of Jin, I have to show my attitude. It is also my wish to fight with the academy. Right now, only you and Li Manman are worthy of my attention." This sentence came from the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, which showed his respect to the academy. Second brother didn't agree. He shook his head and said, "If there's a chance, I think third sister would like to learn from you." Hearing this, Lu Bai fell silent. The carriage became quiet again. After an unknown period of time, his somewhat shocked voice came from the car. Lin of the Academy. Second brother said, third sister doesn't use this name anymore. Lu Bai was indeed the most powerful man in the world. Whether it was wisdom or thinking, he was as fast as his sword. He deduced that the mysterious 23-year cicada cultivation was in the academy. Without a doubt, this was the most shocking piece of news in the cultivation world in over 20 years. Even he couldn't help but feel extremely shocked after hearing this secret. It seems that Haotian Taoism underestimated the academy. Lu Bai said, Xiong Chumo, that idiot, would definitely lose in the academy. But I didn't know that he was also in the academy. Now that I think about it, his ending must be worse than I thought. This sentence also had two layers of meaning. Lu Bai thought that the 23-year cicada cultivation was stronger than the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill. As for himself, of course, he was stronger than the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill. However, the general trend of the world is like a surging river that never returns. If you follow it, you will prosper, and if you go against it, you will perish. Even if Lin Wu is in the academy can't go against heaven. Lu Bai's voice came from the carriage again. Under the Abbey Dean's attack, your senior brother can only hold on for 3 more days. The Buddhism sect hasn't taken any action yet. Today, Junimo, you and I will fight. No matter what, you can't fight anymore. The verdant canyon will open and the army will march north. The Tang Empire and the academy will perish. Second brother said emotionlessly, you are not a mediocre person. Why would you say such meaningless words? If everything in the world is destined, why do you come to the verdant canyon? Why do I come to the verdant canyon? Why do we stand in front of the verdant canyon? Why does the verdant canyon have to see us? Lu Bai said, these are kind words. After all, we still have to discuss things with swords. Second brother asked, when do we start? Lu Bai said, your sword is still being repaired. It won't be too late to repair it. At this moment, a muffled sound came from under the iron canopy. The heavy iron hammer collided with the fiery red iron sword. Then, the hot sword entered the water with a sizzling sound and white mist. Second brother reached out and took over the repaired iron sword. He said, the sword is repaired. Very good. The cyan curtain of the carriage moved slightly and was lifted by a hand. It was a big hand with slender and strong knuckles, which was suitable for holding a sword. Lu Bai walked out of the carriage. This sword sage, who was worshipped as a god by countless swordsmen, did not look special. His features were slightly sunken and his facial lines were well defined. However, he was just an ordinary middle-aged man. Ordinary was not only a description of him, but also the aura that he exuded. The aura that he exuded was also very ordinary and did not seem to be similar to the legends. This was because his spirit and aura were not in his body, but in the sword. The sword was at his side in its sheath. In novels, legends, and unofficial history, we can often see the imagination of ordinary people about cultivators, or even the imagination of cultivators. They say that everything in the world is a sword, and that the strong can kill all the heroes in the world by picking a flower or a branch. However, these people who only know how to talk about swords are just laughable. Lu Bai looked at the iron sword in second brother's hand and said, a sword is a sword. It can't be a flower or a grass, and it can't be a nothingness in one's hand. Because the sword must be hard, strong, straight, and sharp, so that it can travel outside the blue sky and fall thousands of miles away. Otherwise, it can't even cut the wind, and the friction will melt the sword. How can it break armor and kill people? When I see a person using a sword, I first see if he is using a good sword. Today I saw 2 good swords. Yi Su's sword is made of strange wood, which is the best choice in terms of material. However, compared with your iron sword, it is still lacking. Because the sword must be made of iron. Only when the iron sword is stained with blood can it be called iron blood. Only then can you kill people freely. Lu Bai looked at the fire under the canopy and the simple and honest sixth brother. He praised, "The academy is really a great place. I can't believe that someone can make such a good sword." Second brother walked to the field and said, "But the sword is used by people after all. Your swordsmanship is also very good." Lu Bai said, "All these years, I have been wondering who is stronger between you and Yi Su. Now it seems that you are stronger. Your sword is stronger, and so is your swordsmanship." Second brother said, "But you are the strongest." Lu Bai's expression did not change, because he had heard such comments many times, until no one in the world dared to comment on his sword. When he was young, he comprehended Tao by the big river. Since then, his sword aura had spread across the mountains and rivers. No one had ever dared to question his reputation of being the best in sword Taoism. Sword Taoism is about the sword and swordsmanship. I have always valued the sword. Lu Bai said, "I trained the sword in the cliff cave of the sword garret for more than 10 years and finally made a good sword. Then the headmaster borrowed it. Although it was a pity, it was an honor for the sword to be used by the headmaster. Other than that sword, I have many other good swords, such as the one on my waist. It is also better than your iron sword. As for swordsmanship, I don't think I have any talent. I did not create the qi in front of me. This swordsmanship first appeared in the world, and it came from Mr. Ku." Second brother said, "But you carried it forward and it deserves the respect of all the swordsmen in the world." In the cultivation world, especially in the history of sword Taoism, Lu Bai was an unforgettable name, because he was the first great sword master who raised close combat to an absolute high position. In the past, sword masters in the cultivation world always paid attention to flying swords and controlling sword. In their view, controlling the qi of heaven and earth was the most strict distinction between cultivators and ordinary people. It was not until Lu Bai appeared out of nowhere and became invincible with the qi in front of him that all sword masters saw a new possibility on the road of cultivation. This change could even be said to be revolutionary. Because of this, second brother had respect for him. Lu Bai said, "In the early years, I had been wavering between the two kinds of swordsmanship. It was not until the battle on the East Sea Dike that I realized this wavering had actually violated the original meaning of swordsmanship. At that time, I hurt Yen Sei with my sword from 1,000 miles away. He wrote a talisman toward the violent tide outside the dike. He was so far away, but the bald pen fell on my face." Lu Bai touched his eyebrows and smiled slightly self-mockingly. "After that battle, I finally chose to hold the sword in my hand. The most fundamental difference between the two kinds of swordsmanship lies in whether a cultivator should use the qi of heaven and earth to control the sword or use the sword to control the qi of heaven and earth. Each has its advantages and disadvantages, which are not obvious. But if you think carefully, you will find that the sword should use this kind of method. The Buddhism sect's copper bowl, prayer beads, cudgel and talisman can't work because these natal elements have no shape, but the sword has shape. The shape of the sword is suitable to control the qi of heaven and earth to hurt people. Because the sword is straight and has a sharp edge, so it can't be mediocre. No mediocre at all. You can't waver, whether it's 10,000 miles with the sword or 1 foot in front of you." Lu Bai said, "You told Yi Su a lot of principles before, but I don't understand those principles. I only know the principles of swordsmanship. Since the sword is straight, it should pierce and pierce. Only the simplest is the most powerful." Second brother said, "Principles are things of the human world. You shouldn't stay in the human world, so you don't need to pay attention to them. But if you want to stay in the human world and use your sword, some principles still need to be followed. Continue to write the second chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 770. If it can be broken, then it cannot be followed. This was Lu Bai's answer, and it was also the logic that the experts were used to. Second brother actually had the same idea. His iron sword was his own rule, but he was best at breaking other people's rules. So he continued to ask, "Since you want to break it, why not?" Only he and Lu Bai understood the meaning of this sentence. At the very beginning, Lu Bai had already given his answer, but that answer could not explain his second senior brother. Lu Bai looked at the sky and did not say anything. Since there was no answer, he could only continue. In the end, he still had to use the sword to discuss the matter. The way of the sword is divided into sword and technique is divided into power and technique. Force is psychokinesis, technique is the means. When I first entered the awareness state, I saw the surging yellow river. My psyche power was the strongest in the world. I've been practicing the sword for 3 days, and I've left nothing out in 8,000 directions around me. Even a rainstorm can't touch my clothes. I'm the strongest in the world. Lu Bai looked at Jun Mo and said, "If we were to fight on a normal day, you would definitely lose. However, in the past 2 days, you have killed 1,000 riders with your sword and your chi has been growing. You have a 91 chance of winning. Now that you have defeated Yi Su, your sword will has reached its peak, so it is 82. However, the way of the sword is not based on numbers, so you will definitely lose today. Since it's not a matter of numbers, why bother counting?" Second brother said, "I've always believed that a battle that hasn't started can't be decided." Lu Bai laughed and praised, "Good spirit." Jun Mo had already walked to the middle of the field, and was some distance away from the exit of the verdant canyon. In front of him were scattered arrows and more than 200 swords that looked like dead branches in autumn. These swords were of different styles. The only thing they had in common was that these swords no longer had an owner. The Battle of the Verdant Canyon had been going on for more than 2 days. He had blocked the continuous attacks of hundreds of cultivators and seized more than 200 swords. These swords were stuck in the field like a sword grave, lifeless. Today, when he walked into the graveyard of swords, the 200 swords seemed to sense something and trembled slightly, like tree branches being blown by the wind, forming a forest of swords. It was very much like the forest of swords in the depths of the Academy meadow. Jun Mo stood in the forest of swords with a solemn expression and raised the iron sword in his hand. Lu Bai looked at the forest of swords quietly. He looked at the tall and straight man in the forest. His right hand stretched out his wide sleeve and held the hilt of his sword. The ancient sword at his waist was silent. His palms were wide and thick, and his fingers were long and slender, which was most suitable for holding a sword. He gripped the hilt tightly, and there was not a single gap between them. It was as if his hand and the hilt had always been connected. The ancient sword in the scabbard vibrated slightly, letting out a joyful whistle. When he grasped the hilt, the sword in the scabbard became a part of his body. In other words, his body became an extension of the sword, and the two could no longer be separated. Grasping the sword with one's hand did not mean that the sword was in one's hand. When Lu Bai drew his sword, it could also be 1,000 miles long. Not walking the path of mediocrity, and only walking the path of absolute power did not mean that he had to choose only one of the 2 sword-controlling methods. Back then, Lu Bai might have wavered, but now that he had reached the consummate realm, he was no longer troubled by this problem. How could the enlightened sword heart be covered in dust? He could choose at will. No one knew which sword-controlling method he would choose today. People only knew that when he drew his sword, no one could withstand it, because his sword was the fastest. Except for the Abbey Dean and eldest brother who were in the limitless state, and the chief monk of scripture who could resist it with his body, no one else was worth mentioning. There was a universal truth. If Lu Bai drew his sword first, he would win. Jun Mo did not let Lu Bai draw his sword first. He chose to draw his sword first. Even if the iron sword was drawn first, it still might not work. Because Lu Bai's sword was too fast, so fast that it could reach first even though it was drawn later. Junmo did not choose to let the iron sword break through the air. Instead, he held the iron sword and swung it forward. Just like every time he swung his sword in the past 2 days. There was no expression on his face, and his academy uniform did not tremble at all. The wide and straight iron sword swung out with his sleeves naturally. It did not roll up any clouds, but rolled up countless auras of heaven and earth. There was no enemy, so where should the iron sword hit? There was indeed no enemy in front of him. But apart from the autumn wind, there were more than 200 sword hilts stuck in the ground. There was a forest of swords. The iron sword swung into the forest of swords and hit a waste sword. That waste sword was deeply stuck in the field. It suddenly received a heavy blow, and the sword hilt shattered. The sword body was bent to the extreme. The majestic power that came from the iron sword was like a hurricane that pulled it out of the soil. There was a shrill sound of air being cut. The waste sword turned into a sword light and flew towards the south. Junmo continued to swing the iron sword. The way he swung his sword was as natural as ever. Every iron sword carried the power of heaven and earth. Every time he swung his sword, there would be a waste sword in the field that flew through the air. It was as powerful as a crossbow. Whether it was sword momentum or swordsmanship, his realm was lower than Liu Bai's. No matter what sword technique he used, he could not be stronger than Liu Bai, nor could he be faster than Liu Bai's sword. So he chose a method that no one would have thought of. He did not hold his sword and move forward, nor did he fly away. Instead, he swung his sword. He waved his sleeves. It was not a slash, or a stab. It was a smash, or rather, a hit. He gathered the chi of heaven and earth between the green mountains into the iron sword and struck the waste sword on the ground. He used the power of the green mountains to help the sword fly through the air. Only in this way could he be faster than Liu Bai's sword. It was for the green mountains. In front of the verdant canyon, there were countless shrill sounds of swords. Dozens of swords leaped up from the blood-stained field like stones that had been hit hard. They turned into dozens of sword lights and instantly disappeared. When they reappeared, they were already in front of the horse carriage. Flying swords were a way for cultivators to use their psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth and indirectly control their natal flying sword. For a powerful cultivator like Liu Bai, his heart was in the sword and he could cut people's heads from thousands of miles away. Junmo's hit of the Green Mountains directly used the chi of heaven and earth on the sword. He skipped the part of psyche power and turned the power of nature into a terrifying speed of the sword. The speed of the swords before the verdant canyon had already exceeded the cultivator's imagination of flying swords. No one had ever thought of controlling a sword like this, nor had they seen such a fast flying sword. These swords were so fast that the air in the field began to wail. They were so fast that the naked eye and perception could no longer capture their traces. They were so fast that it was as if they had disappeared. They were so fast that Liu Bai was not confident that he could fly out before these flying swords. So he did not control the flying sword. Instead, he drew his sword. The sword in his hand looked very ordinary, and there were even some traces of rust on it. Because he had not drawn his sword for many years. No one would have thought that Liu Bai's first sword would be defense. Liu Bai did not expect it either. Because he did not expect that there was someone in the world who could think of a way faster than his sword. If it had been any other time, he would have praised and even admired Junmo's power. But at this time, he had to look serious because he had to face these swords. He was forced to defend. He had to defend. Therefore, he held his sword horizontally. The ancient sword was placed horizontally in front of him. It was not a bow, but a sword will. This sword will was like the ancient sword itself, absolutely straight and did not tremble in the autumn wind. Only a magnificent city built on solid granite could have such a feeling. His sword was rusty, straight and indestructible, like an old city wall that had withstood the erosion of thousands of years of wind and rain. It looked dilapidated but was actually still as strong as ever. At this moment, Junmo's first sword had arrived. The abandoned sword no longer felt lifeless. The blade of the sword rubbed against the slightly cold autumn air and glowed. It was not a warm red light, but a cold light. The tip of the sword pierced through many layers of air and vibrated at a high speed. Even if there was a thick iron plate in front of it, it would be directly broken by the high-speed vibration. The sword was about to reach Lu Bai. It was about to meet the horizontal rusted sword. It sounded like the collective ringing of the ancient bells before the Lank Temple was destroyed. It sounded like a naughty child throwing a stone into a calm lake. A voice sounded in the air in front of Lu Bai. That voice was very clear, but also very far away. It sounded like a piece of paper being torn. It also sounded like a piece of paper being wet by the rain and then being crumpled into a ball and thrown under the desk. The abandoned sword with unimaginable speed and power entered the air in front of Lu Bai and suddenly stopped. It did not meet the horizontal rusted sword. It was 1 foot away from it. It did not even touch Lu Bai's body. In front of Lu Bai, there seemed to be an invisible barrier. Junmo's sword with Qing Shan was stuck in this barrier. This barrier was the sword intent of the horizontal sword. It was the city wall. Junmo's second sword with Qing Shan followed closely. It also hovered in front of Lu Bai, unable to pierce through the barrier. No one saw that the rusted sword in front of Lu Bai was slightly bent, although the degree of bending was so small that it was almost invisible to the naked eye. Then came the third sword. The fourth sword. Dozens of swords broke through the air like lightning and then hovered in front of Lu Bai. Every time the sword came, the rusted sword in Lu Bai's hand would bend a little. Until the end, the rusted sword made an obvious bend. However, there was no sign of it breaking. That was because the sword had suddenly become soft. The sword in his hand was no longer the mottled old city wall, but the river under the city wall. The moat. The river water was gentle, but it could protect a majestic city. None of the dozens of swords could pierce through the invisible barrier and stood still in the air. This scene looked very strange and shocking. It seemed that there was a forest of swords in the air in front of Lu Bai. These swords were very close to his body, and the sharp sword tips with cold light almost touched his eyes. Anyone in this situation would probably feel afraid. But the expression on Lu Bai's face was still so calm. Because his sword was in his hand. Then these swords could not get close to his body. Not close. Not far. 1 foot away. This was the 1 foot in front of Lu Bai. This was his world. This was the world of the sword in his hand. Wind could enter, so could rain. Other swords could not enter. I'm really going to vomit blood. I'll continue to write more. I don't know when the update will be. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 771. The swords could not advance, but they kept coming, like wind and rain. Junmo waved the iron sword in his hand with the strength of a mountain. More than 200 swords stuck in the soil in front of him continuously flew into the air, drawing lines in the autumn sky. The entire field reverberated with the shrill whistling sound of the sword. The slightly chilly autumn wind fled in all directions. This extremely domineering scene shocked everyone's mind. Junmo's body and mind were very tired after defeating Yi Su with difficulty. But taking this opportunity, his sword intent was extremely strong. It was the most perfect moment. He was at his strongest. However, he still could not defeat Lu Bai. Lu Bai held his sword horizontally in front of him, looking calm. No one knew if he had moved the sword in his hand. It seemed that the rusted sword had been lying in front of him, quietly and motionlessly. Or it might have moved countless times. At this time, more than 200 swords were floating in the air in front of him. Because there were so many swords, they blocked the sky and looked particularly eerie, even a little crowded. This scene was really shocking. Liu Bei put away his sword. The 200 swords in the air no longer had anything to support them and fell to the ground with a loud bang. Like a pile of firewood that was not tied up tightly, they scattered to the sides. Liu Bei looked at Jun Mo and remained silent. There was no longer any admiration in his eyes. Admiration was the comment and recognition of the weak by the strong. After the attack of the sword rain, Liu Bei confirmed that Jun Mo was qualified and capable to fight with him on an equal footing. So he could not admire him anymore, he could only respect him. Liu Bai's greatest respect for his enemy was the sword. However, he did not have time to use his sword, because Jun Mo used his sword again. This time, Jun Mo did not use his own iron sword, but the discarded swords that he had taken away. The scattered swords in front of Liu Bei were still bouncing, and then suddenly bounced up. More than 200 swords instantly turned into more than 200 sword lights, breaking through the air. In the field in front of the verdant canyon, in the autumn sky, they danced wildly and fell like lightning. They pierced Liu Bei. Liu Bei frowned slightly and held his sword horizontally again. Swords could fly, but they relied on psyche power to control the chi of heaven and earth, and then control the swords. The more swords one wanted to control, the higher the requirement for the realm of psyche power. A natal item was a very difficult thing. There were very few cultivators in the cultivation world who would cultivate several natal items at the same time. Even great swordsmen in the see-through realm would only use their own natal sword. If he had to divert his attention to control more flying swords, it would be a very unwise choice. This kind of unwisdom lay more in the degree of difficulty. In the Battle of the Spring Breeze Pavilion that rainy night, Cao Shaoshu, who was in the see-through realm, controlled 5 swords to kill the enemy. After that, it caused a long period of discussion in the cultivation circle. Everyone praised his talent, but also inevitably had some doubts. Now that Cao Shaoshu had entered the knowing destiny state for a long time, the number of flying swords that he could control had already exceeded 5. But because it was a taboo to divide one's attention, he rarely used this method. But Jun Mo did it today. The swords danced in the sky in front of the verdant canyon, like a flock of birds, constantly falling at high speed. After being shaken off by the barrier around Liu Bei, they flew at high speed in the air, and then fell again. Some of the flying swords were straight and extremely fast, like lightning. Some of the flying swords were like soft brush strokes on paper, drawing circles in the air. Some of the flying swords had unpredictable trajectories, sometimes to the east, sometimes to the west, and sometimes to the east. They danced wildly like swimming dragons. The more than 200 flying swords seemed to have a life of their own. The swords kept flying, shuttling back and forth between the sky and the ground, reflecting the autumn sunshine around the field. The whole sky was flashing, and the scene was extremely beautiful and spectacular. Different from the battle with Yi Su, Jun Mo's performance at this time was gorgeous and extremely presumptuous. His psyche power rushed out like a gust of wind, controlling more than 200 swords accurately and valiantly from a distance of thousands of feet, and drawing a scene that stunned everyone. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army watching the battle in the southern field was shocked speechless, especially those sword masters, who were even paler, thinking, is he still a human? Liu Bai's sword momentum was stronger. He could use his powerful psyche power to forcibly seize control of those flying swords, just like how Jun Mo dealt with those cultivators yesterday. Even if he could not succeed in controlling all of them, he could at least subdue most of them. But he was not willing to split his attention on this matter, because he was used to using only one sword, because only absolute simplicity was absolute power, and one sword could defeat thousands of swords. He held the sword horizontally in front of him, not caring about repeating his own move. The flying swords between the sky and the ground could not come within 1 foot of him. Unlike others, Liu Bei was not shocked by this dazzling scene. On the contrary, he did not understand why Jun Mo used so many swords. Just like Jun Mo did not understand why Yi Hongyu used so many swords yesterday. Even at their state, it was no longer a taboo to use swords at the same time, but Lu Bai believed that Jun Mo would understand the difference between simplicity and power. There must be a reasonable reason for everything that did not make sense. Yi Hongyu used thousands of swords yesterday because she wanted to set up a confinement array. What did Jun Mo want to do? Or did he not want to do anything? He just wanted to use this method to make Lu Bai think for a long time, and even hope that Lu Bai would be a little distracted? Lu Bai did not panic. He stepped forward and walked toward the verdant canyon with steady footstep. He was walking, and the sword in his hand was also walking, so the world within 1 foot of him was walking with him. The whistling of the swords in front of the verdant canyon became more and more shrill. More than 200 swords bombarded the ground like desperate birds, and there was a series of dull thunder-like sounds in the wilderness. Lu Bai's footsteps were still steady. He was the Sage of Sword. He was the most powerful man in the world. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged man. The sword in his hand was a rusty sword that was even worse than an ordinary one. He held the sword horizontally in front of him, and the way he walked even looked a little funny. Facing Jun Mo's gorgeous flying swords, his response was so clumsy. But no one could break it. Even if eldest brother stood in front of the verdant canyon, he could only avoid it but not break it. Because he was walking with his own world. As long as the opponent was within 1 foot of him, he would definitely lose. Lu Bai walked towards the verdant canyon step by step. His footsteps were steady and slow, and his movements were clumsy. This clumsiness represented prudence. As the most powerful man in the world, this clumsiness was even more respectful. Respect for the Academy and Jun Mo. This kind of clumsiness might also hide a deeper meaning. Lu Bai's world within 1 foot of him could not be broken, but he could avoid it and retreat. Heaven had eyes. This might be the last chance for the Academy to leave. If Jun Mo and the disciples of the Academy were willing to leave, then they would never have to face Lu Bai's world within 1 foot of him. They could be free and enjoy the world. But Jun Mo was not willing to retreat. He raised the iron sword in his hand. His choice had nothing to do with the Tang Empire or the Academy. He was in high spirits and full of lofty sentiment. A gentleman should not walk on a stranger's path, whether it was close or far away. Let's not talk about other people's business. I'll kill him first. At the end I had written, in this life, the ultimate pursuit is just a moment of youth. But I found it too sour, so I didn't put it in. As for the last word, yeah, I thought for a long time and still put it in. My friend in Beijing said that "th" can only be used after you. But who cares? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 772. Like looking at an abyss or a raging river. I wrote this chapter very nervously, so it was very slow and late. I will write more after this chapter, but it will still be very slow. No matter how slow he walked, there would be a moment when he reached the end. Lu Bai walked to the verdant canyon and stopped in front of Jun Mo. He was more than 1 foot away from Jun Mo, but it was enough. The so-called 1 foot in front of him was just a vague concept. In fact, Lu Bai's absolute territory depended on his arm and the length of his sword. Wherever he held the sword, it was the world of the strongest in the world. The distance was perfect. It was neither too far nor too close, just right for him to cut. Distance was a relative concept. It was very fair for the two of them, so Jun Mo naturally felt that it was perfect. So he did not even think about it. He raised the iron sword and cut toward Lu Bai. He did not say anything, nor did he build up strength. He just swung the sword. It was clean and even a bit bright and fresh. It was just like the green mountains behind him that were still green in the late autumn. The iron sword fell, like a green mountain falling on Lu Bai's head. Liu Bai no longer held his sword horizontally, because his sword was also 1 foot in front of him. This was his first sword strike in the truest sense. Liu Bai's sword must be a sword. When the rusted sword in his hand fell, the mottled rust instantly disappeared. The sword suddenly shone, reflecting the flowing clouds in the sky and the green mountains in the wilderness. It was extremely beautiful. This sword seemed to take away all the light between heaven and earth and countless creation in nature. It was incomparably brilliant. The light could be dazzling, as bright as the sun, and people did not dare to look directly at it. However, this sword did not hurt the eyes of anyone watching the battle in the wilderness. Instead, people were intoxicated by it. People were intoxicated by this beautiful and moving picture. The celadon sky, the silky clouds, the warm sunshine, the beautiful wilderness, and a surging river. This river originated from the wilderness. It was originally a trickling stream, stubbornly breaking through the mountains of the Ueluan kingdom, flowing through the fertile soil and abundant rainwater in the primeval forest. It received countless tributaries of rainwater and became a big river, carrying the sand from the south. The river was dyed yellow, and it became more and more majestic. The turbid waves were monstrous, and the yellow river water continuously slapped against the black cliff rocks, stirring up thousands of mud-like waves. It was as if 10,000 horses were roaring in it, and the sound was astonishing. Between the black cliff rocks, a young man was practicing his swordsmanship. His expression was calm. The sound of the waves could not enter his ears, and the shaking of the cliff rocks could not move his footsteps at all. He was focused on nothing else. Heaven and earth trembled and lost color, but no one knew whether it was because of the surging river or the person practicing swordsmanship by the riverside. When Liu Bai entered the path of cultivation, he saw a surging river at the initial awareness state. Hence, he was recognized as a peerless genius by the cultivation world. Later on, he realized his swordcraft by the river, hence his swordcraft was called the day sword. When the day sword was drawn, the river could be seen. Liu Bai's sword was the river. When he drew his sword, the river would appear. Everyone who saw this river would eventually be swallowed by the raging river water. A big river with wide waves. The muddy yellow water fell from the sky and became the Milky Way. It was as if a hole had been pierced in the sky, and countless rivers outside the dome fell like waterfalls. This river did not have any other aura, it was just powerful. The great river came crashing down. Jun Mo's eyes suddenly brightened. Looking at the turbid waves of the river, his eyes were still clear like a brook. He also raised his eyebrows. All these details proved that he was excited at this time. He had always been a person who could hardly be excited. In the eyes of Ning Ke and other younger brothers, he was a strict and old-fashioned man who would never be associated with excitement. Ever since he defeated Yi Su, the expression on his face hadn't changed at all. But this time he was really excited, because when he saw the surging river, he found that he was actually afraid. This emotion was very strange to him, so he was very excited. He finally saw the most powerful sword in the world. He waved the iron sword and chopped down at the river. The wide and straight iron sword, with the power of Qing Shan, chopped heavily into the muddy and surging river. The river suddenly split and rushed to the banks, revealing the bottom of the river full of sand and rocks. The next moment, the river rushed back again, covering the sand and rock. Jun Mo waved the iron sword again. The river split again. He continued to wave the iron sword. The river continued to split and then recovered. There were many times when the iron sword hit the bottom of the river. The iron sword cut deep sword marks in the mud at the bottom of the river, breaking thousands of rocks. The sword and the rocks collided, making a dull sound. It was like the sound of iron striking. Jun Mo continued to wave the sword. In a breath, hundreds of iron swords appeared. But they could not stop the surging river from flowing southeast. The river continued to flow. Liu Bai's sword also continued to move forward. The river that fell from the sky was the most magnificent scene that could be seen in the human world. Facing such a surging river, humans would subconsciously look up to it and then be intoxicated. Even if they woke up, they would not have the courage to resist because of despair. This was the most powerful part of the day swordsmanship. His sword did not borrow the power of heaven and earth. His sword was a part of heaven and earth, and the most magnificent part. At this moment, his sword was the concrete representation of heaven and earth. In front of the river, Junimo could stand still and silently wave his sword to resist. He had already surpassed most cultivators in the world. However, the river was hard to stop, and this was far from enough. Lu Bai's sword style arrived. The river roared. The wind roared. The crown fell. The bun scattered. Junmo's black hair danced in the wind. The uniform on his body had long since been cut into countless small holes, and his entire body was covered in blood. But he did not feel embarrassed at all. He was still solemn, as if he was still attending the banquet. The banquet was not over yet. His expression was still focused, calm, and even a little dull. He continued to wave the iron sword. But this time, the iron sword was no longer swinging. It became very delicate. It was as delicate as the embroidery needle in Mu Yu's hand. Junimo began to embroider with the iron sword. In an instant, the iron sword in his hand trembled countless times. The river was Lu Bai's sword. The wind and waves were the places where the iron sword and Lu Bai's sword had met hundreds of times. Junimo carved words in the wind and carved flowers in the wave. He wanted to use the smallest tools to carve the most magnificent rivers and mountains. He wanted to use the most silent method to decorate the most magnificent scene, just like how he used time and rain to polish the green stone under the eaves. In the Battle of the Verdant Canyon, Junimo knew from the beginning that he would have to face Lu Bai. Just as Lu Bai had said, he was not as good as Lu Bai in terms of sword momentum or swordsmanship. He was not Lu Bai's opponent, so he had to find another way out. Lu Bai had once written a letter to Yi Hongyu. There was a sword drawn on the letter. Ning Ke had seen the sword. He had made a copy in exchange for the Hauran sword technique and placed it at the back of the mountain of the academy. Before going south to the Verdant Canyon, Junimo had looked at the paper for a long time before deciding on the sword style. This kind of sword style was completely opposite to his temperament. But this was the only way he had come up with after careful consideration. Just as Ning Ke had said, the people in the academy had always believed that if there was only one way left, it must be the best way. Moreover, he had told Yi Su that after careful consideration, if a rule was reasonable, he would not give in even if there were thousands of people in front of him. This was etiquette. So even if he wanted to oppose it, he still insisted. In order to defeat Lu Bai, Junimo had made ample preparations. He had displayed his swordsmanship to the fullest, from the most ferocious to the most subtle parts. This was indeed his most powerful moment. But the Yellow River was still the Yellow River. After all, Lu Bai was Lu Bai. He was not a willow branch by the river, a shepherd boy under the willow, a wild man on a sheepskin raft, a widow pushed into the turbid waves, or a rock in the river. He was the great river. No matter how freely Junmo's sword style was, it was still inferior to this great river. There was only a slight difference. The words in the air were not finished, and the flowers in the waves were still a petal short. The autumn wind closed the traces, and the waves restrained the sword flowers. His sword broke through the iron sword and came to Junimo. There was a soft swoosh. Second brother's right arm was cut off at the shoulder and fell into the mountains. No one knew where it landed. The sword in Lu Bai's hand broke into two at the same time. If he had been faster for a moment, Lu Bai's sword would have broken first. Junimo could not be faster for a moment, so his right arm holding the iron sword was cut off. Countless tiny sword cuts appeared on his body. These small cuts were all from Lu Bai's sword style. His academy uniform was completely soaked, and blood kept dripping to the ground. Blood gushed out from the broken arm like a raging river. Looking at Lu Bai in front of him, Junmo's face was very pale. At this moment, his right arm was cut off, and the iron sword had flown away. There was only half of the sword left in Lu Bai's hand. A broken sword was still a sword, and it could still kill. Lu Bai did not stop because he could not stop. His sword was the day sword, and what fell was the river water. He could not stop until it was over. What was done could not be undone. Lu Bai held the broken sword and slashed at Junmo. The great river appeared again. The surging of the yellow river was even stronger than before. Anyone who saw the great river would die. No one in the world could resist this great river, because the water of the yellow river came from the sky. It flowed into the sea and never returned. The broken sword was getting closer. One could even see the metal lines on the broken sword. Junmo knew that he was wrong. He had been wrong since the Battle of Verdant Canyon. More accurately, he had been wrong in the academy. He should not have looked at the paper or the sword. He should not have thought about what Lu Bai would do before deciding what he should do. That would make him lose his strongest thing. Maybe that thing was called confidence or pride. He should only think about what he should do, just like he had done in the past few years. What did it matter if his opponent was Lu Bai or someone else? Junmo thought as he looked at the river rushing towards him. If he did not look at the sword, it would disappear. This sword made people intoxicated when they saw the great river, and they felt despair. Then it would disappear. If he knew he was wrong, he had to correct it, no matter when or where. So, facing the most powerful sword in the world, he closed his eyes. The great river surged and fell from the sky, as if it was going to destroy the entire field in front of the Green Mountain. Only he, who did not see this scene, did not feel the majesty of the great river. The turbid yellow river water was everywhere. If he did not see it, he would not be there. The broken sword in Lu Bai's hand slashed through the air. This was the first time the day sword had slashed through the air since it was created. Because the yellow river water came from the sky. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 773. No matter how vast the river was, it could not cover the whole world. But facing this river, no one could find a few dry mounds. Junmo didn't look at the river, but he could feel it. Thus, he found a foothold in the surging river, turned his body slightly, and landed on that spot. He opened his eyes again, and watched the river flowing under his feet like time. He did not sigh like his teacher, but there was a bright luster in his eyes. His cheeks were pale, but his expression was still so calm. A clear whistle burst out from his lips. It was like the cry of a young phoenix or the first sound of a phoenix being reborn. Junmo's black hair danced in the autumn wind. He opened his arms and his sleeves fluttered in the wind. Blood gushed out from his broken arm. His psyche power gushed out wildly into the surroundings. Under the iron canopy of the verdant canyon, a sword in the great felt the call of the wild psyche power. With a swoosh, it pierced through the cabinet and flew out of the canopy, towards the wilderness. In the southern field, in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army Camp, countless exclamations suddenly broke out. Cultivators from various sects suddenly found that their natal swords were out of their control. The crisp sound of friction rose and fell in the camp. It was the sound of swords and scabbards rubbing against each other. Countless flying swords flew out of their scabbards and flew toward the verdant canyon. In the depths of the Green Mountain, several fallen leaves gently covered a large iron sword. A broken arm was still tightly holding the sword hilt. Suddenly, the iron sword trembled violently and flew up again. The world around the field was filled with Junmo's wild and majestic psyche power. Countless swords, summoned by this psyche power, came from all directions as fast as lightning. They instantly crossed a long distance and came to the verdant canyon, stabbing Lu Bai. Lu Bai looked solemn. He put the broken sword in front of him and set up the near world again. Thousands of swords suddenly stopped in the autumn wind around him and hovered in the air. There were so many swords that they formed a huge sword ball, blocking the sky and looking particularly cold. It was full of killing intent. This was the world of swords. This was a world surrounded by swords. Lu Bai was among thousands of swords. He could not see the situation on the other side, and even his connection with the chi of heaven and earth seemed to be cut off. He could only calculate. Jun Mo gripped his own sword amidst thousands of swords. He used his left hand. There were swords everywhere in front of the verdant canyon. The chi of heaven and earth was in chaos. But he could accurately find his own iron sword. This was because his right arm was still attached to the iron sword, unwilling to part with it. Holding the iron sword was the same as holding his own severed arm. He pulled out his iron sword and stabbed at Lu Bai, who was surrounded by thousands of swords. Lu Bai couldn't see it and couldn't calculate it clearly, but he felt the sword. This was the strongest sword he had ever seen in his life. It was even more terrifying than the sword in the hands of the South Sea sword god, who had given him the title of Sword Saint. Lu Bai no longer hesitated. He no longer held his sword horizontally. There were no more city walls or moat. At the most critical moment, he only trusted the sword itself. At this moment, Jun Mo had successfully stimulated all of his battle strength and arrogance. He was confident that he was invincible. In front of the Dave sword, anyone would be able to escape. No matter how terrifying Jun Mo's sword was, it was impossible for it to be a match for him. Lu Bai drew his sword. The great river surged across the plains. He was the Sword Saint. His sword was the Saint of Swords. When he drew his sword, there was only one sword left in the world. It was so close that it expanded. Hundreds and thousands of swords suddenly scattered, flying towards the green mountains and plains. There was nothing that could block Lu Bai's sight or his sword. But there was still a sword in front of the verdant canyon. The iron sword was held in Jun Mo's hand. Then it was held in Jun Mo's hand. This sentence was not repeated. It was the accurate reality. The one holding the hilt was a severed arm. Jun Mo held his severed arm. The scene looked bloody, but it was meaningless, except that the iron sword seemed to have grown longer. Jun Mo drew his sword. He was focused and careful. Even though he was covered in blood, he did not waver. Lu Bai drew his sword. He started later but arrived first. No one in the world could be faster than him. However, there was only half a broken sword left in Lu Bai's hand. The iron sword in Jun Mo's hand was a bit longer than usual. There was a slight sound in front of the verdant canyon. It was like a drop of water falling into a furnace and touching hot red charcoal. The iron sword pierced into Lu Bai's chest. Lu Bai's broken sword was still a distance away from Jun Mo's throat. It was not near or far. It was exactly 1 foot in front of him. Lu Bai abandoned the sword. The broken sword broke again into countless bright pieces. The aura of heaven and earth on the sword was shaking. The field in front of the verdant canyon began to shake. There was a long howl. Lu Bai retreated in the howl. It came like the yellow river rushing into the sea, and left like a flood. Borrowing the aura of heaven and earth, he retreated dozens of feet like a ghost. Then he stopped. He began to cough. He coughed out blood. He looked at the sword wound on his chest and frowned. He finally understood why Jun Mo had to control so many swords. Because Jun Mo wanted him to calculate. Although he was the most powerful man in the world, he was not someone who could calculate everything. No matter how powerful he was, he could not calculate all the changes. Jun Mo did not need to calculate, because thousands of swords were fake. Only his iron sword was real. Even so, Jun Mo's iron sword could not get within 1 foot in front of him. Until his arm was broken and he was seriously injured. Jun Mo was in pain, angry and unwilling. He had been strict and polite for so many years. He had been restrained by his own rules for so many years. But now he finally broke out. He closed his eyes and dodged Lu Bai's fatal sword. He roared, shaking the green mountains and fields. Countless swords came. Lu Bai's sword intent finally had a gap. Junmo's iron sword pierced through the gap. Perhaps Lu Bai had purposely created that gap, because he believed that his sword was the fastest at such a close distance. But he did not think of one thing. Swordsmanship was divided into swords and techniques, and then into momentum and technique. Besides speed, there was also length. Lowering his head to look at the bleeding wound, Lu Bai smiled. His smile was not lonely, but self-deprecating and emotional. No matter how he thought about it, he could never have imagined that the final outcome would be like this. He could accept that both sides were injured, but he could not accept the reason. The reason was ridiculous. The broken sword and the long sword met. For some reason, the one holding the broken sword stabbed his opponent to death. But for some reason, the one holding the long sword gained the advantage. This was a battle scene that ordinary people who had just learned swordsmanship could imagine. He and Junmo were the two strongest swordsmen in the world. But in the end, they used this method to put an end to the battle. He suddenly thought that a clear stream would become a turbid river, but it would become clear again after entering the sea. Could it be that the swordsmanship cultivation followed the same principle? I wrote these 2 chapters for 8 hours today. I can't finish them. I've seen some comments and I'm not very satisfied with these chapters. What I want to say is that this is really a problem of my intelligence and ability. Everyone's ability has a limit, and it's impossible to write as well as you want. I can only say that I've done my best to write the chapters on the Battle of Verdant Canyon. There's no pretense. I've written it with all my might, so I'm satisfied with myself. I hope everyone is satisfied too. Good night. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 774. The sound of footsteps came from behind Junmo. Except for the 4th brother who was holding the river and mountain sandbox, the rest of the people from the academy all rushed out from under the iron shelter. The 6th brother held the iron hammer and stared at Lu Bai, who was more than 30 meters away, vigilantly. Baigong Weiyang and Shimen Buhua held the zither and the flute and stood on both sides of Junmo. They all knew that even though Lu Bai was seriously injured, as long as he waved his sword, they would still die behind the iron shelter. But they still rushed over, because the 2nd brother needed them at this time. Wang Qi held the medicine box and was preparing with a pale face. Mu Yu held the needle and was ready to stop the bleeding for Junmo, but her hands were trembling. Looking at his broken shoulder, she felt as if her arm had been cut off, which was very painful. Junmo looked at the teardrop on her eyelashes and stretched out his left hand to brush over the wound. As his fingers brushed the teardrop, several strands of pure qi of heaven and earth, like the most wonderful doctor's hands, covered his broken shoulder with an invisible net, and the blood stopped instantly. Wang Qi was slightly relieved. He poured medicine on his wound and was ready to bandage it. Lu Bai looked at the scene more than 30 meters away and did nothing. Suddenly, he had a deeper understanding of the reason why the academy was so powerful. He said, "I have a few questions." Junmo asked the 6th brother to step aside and looked at him not far away. "Go ahead." Lu Bai asked, "I gave you a chance at the beginning. Why didn't you retreat?" Junmo said, "When you challenged the sword god of South Sea, it was obvious that you were no match for him. Why didn't you retreat at that time?" Lu Bai was silent for a moment and said, "That makes sense." Junmo said, "That's why I didn't retreat." Lu Bai sighed and said, "You paid such a heavy price, but you still didn't kill me. Now that I think about it, I can't help but feel sorry for you." Junmo said, "It's worth it to lose an arm for you to be seriously injured and unable to fight again." Lu Bai said, "No matter how serious a sword wound is, it can be healed, but a severed arm cannot be regrown. Right now I can't fight, but it's only a temporary thing. You can't hold the sword in your right hand, but it's a permanent thing. Exchanging a lifetime's worth of experience for a moment's worth of experience, I have indeed lost. But in this battle of the verdant canyon, I have won. Even if I am half dead, I can still defend the verdant canyon, but you must leave. Junimo looked at him and said, because you are too powerful, you want to do a lot of things. You value life very much. You are seriously injured and have to go back to the sword tower to recuperate. Lu Bai looked at him quietly and suddenly smiled. He did not expect that at the moment when both sides were injured, the other party could actually see what he was searching for. He said, "You should also value it." Junimo asked, "Why should I value him?" Lu Bai said, "The 1,000 years of the Tang Empire cannot compare to a moment on the path of cultivation. In that case, apart from ourselves, what else can we value? Everyone's promise is himself. Valuing oneself is valuing one's promise." Junmo's gaze passed Lu Bai's body, the silent carriage, and fell on the mighty army of the Divine Hall in the southern wilderness. He said, "I promise that as long as I am still standing, no one will cross the verdant canyon." Lu Bai said, "If you die in the hands of those rascals, it will be a pity. Do your best, don't ask about the road ahead, and don't have any regrets." Junimo said, "And even you can't kill me. Who can?" Lu Bai looked at him, who was covered in blood and holding an iron sword, and suddenly felt that he was looking at another person. "I seem to see Mr. Ku in the past." Lu Bai said, "Yesterday I felt regretful that I should have killed you at the beginning of the Battle of the Verdant Canyon. Now I feel lucky. Before you die, let's see you shine more brightly in this wilderness." After saying this, he turned around and walked towards the quiet carriage. As the carriage gradually moved away, Junimo withdrew his gaze and looked at his left hand. The ring finger of his left hand was tied with a red string. It was wet with blood and was a little tight. He continued to look down at the broken arm and the iron sword. He did not know if it was because he had lost too much blood or because his psyche power had been used up, but his face was very pale. Looking at the broken arm and the iron sword, he was silent for a long time. No one knew what he was thinking. At this point in the Battle of the Verdant Canyon, the disciples of the Academy and the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism were either dead or injured. The situation was in a stalemate and had reached the most difficult moment. However, the army was in the south, and everyone could see the final outcome. The West Hill Divine Palace was not satisfied. They had never thought that they would have to pay such a high price to pass through the Verdant Canyon. They did not expect that even the Sage of Sword, Lu Bai, could not succeed in one go. Hope eventually turned into disappointment. Some people found it hard to understand and even had doubts. The new commander of the West Hill Divine Palace Divine Guards, Su Chen, was one of them. Su Chen was a trusted follower of the hierarch lord of the Divine Hall. After Luo Kadi was shot to death by Ning Ke in the wilderness, he took over the position. Now, his status in the West Hill Divine Palace was extremely high, only below the two great divine priests. Looking at the carriage that was slowly returning, his face became a little ugly. "Lord Sage of Sword, I need an explanation." Su Chen looked at the carriage and said, "You clearly have the strength to fight again. Why did you retreat?" The disciples of the Sword Garret who were heading to the carriage heard this, and glared back at him. Su Chen's face was as cold as ice because he was really angry and disappointed. If Lu Bai was really seriously injured by Junmo's sword, then what was there for him to be afraid of? Moreover, Lu Bai's sword was already broken. A person without a sword could no longer be called the Sage of Sword. After a long time, Lu Bai's voice still did not come from the carriage. There was only a cough. Lu Bai was seriously injured and blood had entered his lungs. His pain and discomfort could be heard from his cough. Su Chen's eyes showed a hint of mockery. Lu Bai continued to cough, and the sound became louder and louder. Su Chen's pupils shrank, and the mockery instantly turned into fear and despair. because there was a line of blood between his eyebrows. The coughing continued to come from the quiet carriage. Every time Lu Bai coughed, there would be another line of blood on Su Chen's body. Whether it was the armor with golden rune lines on his body or his right hand that had secretly grasped the hilt of his sword. After a cough, there was a line of blood. There was a series of crashing noises. Su Chen and his warhorse turned into dozens of pieces of flesh and scattered on the field. Blood flowed everywhere. Lu Bai finally stopped coughing and said, "Let's go." The disciples of the sword Garrett came to the side of the carriage and protected it as it walked out of the military camp. They looked around vigilantly. Countless eyes were watching the carriage. No one dared to stop it, no one dared to speak, and no one even dared to show any doubt in their eyes. Lu Bai and Jun Mo had fought and both of them were seriously injured. Jun Mo said that he was seriously injured and could no longer fight, but the word fight was only between the two of them. It was a conversation between the two strongest swordsmen in the world. It had nothing to do with anyone else. The goshawk had fought for several days and nights in the sky. Its feathers had fallen off and it was covered in blood. Its sharp beak was worn out and it seemed to be dying, but it was not an opponent that an ant could defeat. Lu Bai was seriously injured and did not have a sword. But he was still the strongest in the world. Looking at the carriage slowly driving out of the military camp, the people of the Divine Hall Coalition Army had complicated expressions. Some were in awe, but most of them were at a loss and afraid of what to do next. Even the priests of the West Hill Divine Palace had the same feeling at this time. Lu Bai, the most powerful on their side, was injured and left. What about the verdant canyon? Yi Hongyu looked at the leaving carriage through the heavy gauze and did not speak. The climax of the Battle of Verdant Canyon was the battle between Lu Bai and Jun Mo. She believed that she would not be able to see such a battle between two swords for many years to come. As for an idiot like Su Chen, she did not care if he died. She was more concerned about the aftertaste after the climax. She wanted to know how long Jun Mo, who was only half dead, could last. The horses neighed and the cavalry was ready to go again. Then, like flowing water, they separated out of the military camp and converged in the field. They became a calm but powerful tide and surged toward the verdant canyon. The cavalry did not speed up and slowly drove toward the verdant canyon. They were afraid of the horrible sound of the zither and the flute, and the man they feared the most was already heavily injured, so they could deliberately slow down their speed, like a moving mountain range crushing over. This was the best opportunity for the coalition army to seize. Therefore, this attack was led by the commander-in-chief Bai Haixin. Almost all the elite cavalries were mobilized. They were determined to win. Thousands of cavalries stopped in front of the verdant canyon. The vanguard camp was not far from the iron shelter. It was the best distance for a charge. If the zither and flute sounded, the cavalries could dismount and fight on foot at any time. Bai Haixin lifted his visor and looked at the verdant canyon not far away. He looked at the man covered in blood and the iron shelter. His frosty face showed a trace of mockery. "You are now a cripple." He looked at Jun Mo and said, "So I will not accept surrender. Die." Hearing this, Jun Mo's expression did not change. Mu Yu was extremely angry. As the commander-in-chief of the coalition army, Bai Haixin should not have come here in person. But he thought that no matter how powerful a powerhouse was, he would be extremely weak after losing an arm. This was the best opportunity for the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. They had to seize it. The problem was that the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's morale was at its lowest. The headmaster's ascension to heaven had seriously affected the morale of Lu Bai and the Buddhism sect cultivators. Lu Bai, the Sage of Sword, had failed to kill this man, which made the coalition army's morale extremely low. That was why Bai Haixin had personally led the elite troops to attack the verdant canyon. That was why he had deliberately said such humiliating words. Of course, he had also carefully prepared for this. There were dozens of powerful military martial cultivators around him, and guards with big shields. He was not worried that he would be killed by the horrible iron sword. Junemo looked at the general in the army. He did not know who he was, but he knew that he should be a very important person. So he decided to kill this man. If it was any other time, he would definitely walk over with the iron sword without hesitation. But he was seriously injured and his psyche power was exhausted. He was very tired. So he just stood there quietly and looked at Bai Haixin. He began to think about this problem. How could he kill this man? If it was in the past, he would have countless ways. But now, he had to find a new way. He suddenly thought of the moment when Liu Bai retreated. That scene quickly replayed in front of his eyes, and then became extremely slow and countless images superimposed. He saw it clearly. He raised his left hand and summoned the autumn wind with the iron sword in front of the verdant canyon. The chi of heaven and earth was restless and the cold wind blew. The river broke its banks and flooded. His body was like a feather, floating on the water and instantly flying dozens of feet away. He looked at Bai Haixin in front of him and waved his sword. Then he floated back and landed on the ground where he had been. Bai Haixin looked at the verdant canyon and frowned slightly. He did not know what had happened. He only felt that his eyes were blurred and did not know that there was a line of blood on his neck. Then he looked at his subordinate. It was a simple turn of his head and he turned it back. His head separated from his body and fell to the ground. Blood splattered. Screams were heard. Junmo's body shook slightly and his face became even paler. His spirit and psyche power were consumed even more in this simple move. He could fall at any time. He had already killed the enemy's commander. He never gave people a feeling of power and might. But he was a real warrior. A true warrior, even if he only had half his life left, would still take the head of a general in the midst of an army of 10,000. Screams of sorrow and then the sound of hooves like a storm. The black mass of cavalry began to charge. The zither and the flute sounded and the spring water gurgled. From time to time, some cavalrymen fell from their horses, and some horses screamed and fell to the ground. Then they were trampled into meat paste and blood by their companions behind them. The cavalrymen were not cultivators and could not use talismans. They could only fight with their lives. Baigong Weiyang and Shimen Buhua were also fighting. The strings of the zither were repaired by eldest brother, and the flute was unblocked by eldest brother. They were injured by the great divine priest of revelation. Although they were treated by eldest brother, they could not recover in such a short time. They lowered their heads and played the zither and flute attentively. The zither strings were stained with blood and the flute began to drip blood. Mu Yu stood under the eaves of the iron shelter, holding several arrows in her hand and looking at the cavalrymen rushing over like a tide. The sixth brother stood in front of the shelter, holding a heavy iron hammer. The muscles on his arms were about to burst his clothes. The fourth brother held the river and mountain sandbox with trembling arms and a pale face. He knew that the academy was facing the greatest danger at this time and might even be wiped out. But he could not help his younger brother and sister. Junemo waved the iron sword. He held the hilt of the iron sword in his left hand, but it was still powerful. Blood splashed and heads were cut off. Countless cavalrymen fell under the iron sword. But there were too many cavalrymen rushing to the verdant canyon. He had just lost an arm and was seriously injured. Although he was like a reef in the black tide, he could not stop the tide from rising and drowning the reef. Junmo's figure was gradually swallowed up by the cavalrymen. Dozens of cavalrymen crossed the dimming iron sword and came to the verdant canyon. Mu Yu looked at the twisted faces of the cavalrymen and broke the arrows in her hands. A pure aura of heaven and earth overflowed from the iron shelter to the field. 5 deep ravines suddenly appeared on the field that was covered in broken arrows and blood. The 5 ravines just surrounded the exit of the verdant canyon. Those ravines were very deep and bottomless, but they were not wide enough to accommodate the hooves of horses. The front hooves of a war horse stepped into the ravines and were broken by the great force of rushing forward. Tragic neighs sounded one after another. In an instant, more than a dozen war horses fell heavily to the ground. Several fierce shouts came from the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, and then they continued to charge. They knew it was the power of the tactical array. They had to kill the woman who presided over the tactical array as soon as possible. The sixth brother held the iron hammer and stood silently in the front. His burly body completely blocked the younger sister. More than a dozen arrows were shot at him, but he did not change his expression. The sharp arrows hit his bare chest, only leaving a few small white spots on his dark skin. A brave and lucky cavalryman crossed the 5 ravines and rushed to the iron shelter. The war horse was extremely fast, and the strong wind blew against his face. The sixth brother raised the iron hammer and smashed it down. He had been doing this all his life. Even the powerhouses of the devil's doctrine could not avoid his iron hammer. Not to mention an ordinary cavalryman. The heavy iron hammer accurately hit the warhorse's head. With a crack, the horse's head suddenly burst open, and blood spurted out. The warhorse fell heavily to the ground, stirring up a cloud of smoke and dust. The sixth brother raised the iron hammer again, and faced the next enemy. No one knew how long the battle before the verdant canyon had lasted. The autumn sun gradually moved west, and the cold wind became colder. The sound of the zither and flute became weaker and weaker. Bagong and Shimen were pale and coughing up blood. Muyu looked more and more haggard. Wang Chi hid behind the iron stove nervously and looked up at the sky from time to time, as if he was praying. Only the sixth brother kept waving his iron hammer. The ground was full of dead war horses with their heads smashed. The cold light of the iron sword could no longer be seen among the cavalrymen. Only the flying broken limbs and blood proved that the man holding the iron sword was still alive and fighting. The night gradually darkened. The West Hill Divine Palace lit torches and continued to attack the verdant canyon. Under the countless torches, the night seemed as bright as day. The zither and flute music in front of the verdant canyon became more and more chaotic. Bagong and Shimen were no longer pale, and their cheeks were flushed ominously. They no longer coughed up blood because they could no longer cough it out. Mu Yu's hair was unkempt, and her psyche power was almost exhausted. Even the sixth brother's strong arms began to tremble, and the iron hammer was even slightly deformed. The fourth brother stared at the river and mountain sandbox in silence. Wang Chi stood up from behind the iron stove, looking at the night sky and murmuring something. They hadn't seen the second brother for a long time. But they knew that the second brother was still fighting. The iron sword was still there. Because the verdant canyon was still there. The whole night passed. The story that happened that night, the persistence, it was hard to describe clearly with words. The disciples of the academy guarding the verdant canyon and the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall were on the verge of collapse. The morning came, but the sky was still dim. Wang Chi kept looking at the sky. His neck was already sore, but he didn't feel anything. All of a sudden, he shouted. The sixth brother was slightly stunned when he heard the shout. He threw out the deformed iron hammer and knocked over a cavalryman who was rushing over. Then he quickly walked back to the iron shelter. The fourth brother's left hand left the river and mountain sandbox, and he spat out blood. But he didn't care. He took out a fu paper as fast as he could and turned it into a breeze with all his psyche power. The breeze came to the iron stove. The sixth brother whipped the wind and frost with all his strength. The wind gradually became stronger. Then the wind came from the verdant canyon. The wind gradually became stronger. Wang Chi watched the sky for a day and a night, waiting for the wind direction he needed. At this time, the north wind had arrived. He took out the prepared powder from his arms, tore it apart with trembling hands, and sprinkled it on the fire. A slightly sweet smell, as the powder was evaporated by the high-temperature fire, filled the iron shelter, and then went to the fields in the south with the north wind from the verdant canyon. The cavalrymen of the Divine Hall were still charging toward the verdant canyon. Suddenly they smelled a faint sweet smell. Then they began to bleed. Blood flowed from their eyes and nostrils. The blood they shed also carried a faint sweet fragrance. Before a cavalryman died, he suddenly remembered that he had smelled this smell. At that time, he was still in his hometown, and there was a beautiful girl selling white flowers on the street. This sweet smell was the fragrance of flowers. It was the fragrance of gardenia. It turned out that the fragrance of flowers could really attack people, could really kill people. In front of the verdant canyon, the iron sword reappeared. Although it was already dim and there were several cracks on the blade. But the appearance of the iron sword still meant death. Cavalrymen kept falling. Countless blood splashed into the sky and then fell down like a rain of blood. In the rain of blood, Junimo kept killing people. The wind blew, and the fragrance of flowers gradually dispersed. The cavalrymen gradually retreated, and there was finally a flat ground in front of the verdant canyon. Junimo stood there with the iron sword in his hand. There were corpses everywhere around him. No cavalrymen continued to charge. The dark tide turned into a quiet sea. A general of the South Jin Kingdom looked at the tragic scene and suddenly felt very tired. Too many people had died that night. He knew that if they continued to charge, the academy would not be able to defend the verdant canyon. The fragrance of flowers would not last long, and the man with the iron sword would eventually fall. But he did not order his subordinates to continue the charge, because everyone's hearts were already cold, and they were already in despair. The tide could beat the reef for hundreds of millions of years, but no one could bear it. The general noticed that a few captains who were famous for their bravery were looking at the camp in the south. He knew that they were waiting for the signal to retreat, just like him. But there was no sound. They wanted to raise the reins and fight again, but they did not have the courage. No one knew who started it. Maybe it was just an inconspicuous cavalryman. The sound of hooves could be heard as they left the blood-stained verdant canyon and headed south. Then more and more cavalrymen silently left the verdant canyon. Junimo stood in front of the green mountain with his sword in one hand. He was covered in blood and his face was pale, but his expression was still calm. Magnificent was a word used to describe mountains and forests. Sometimes it could also be used to describe a person's temperament and appearance. Like him at this moment. Looking at the tens of thousands of cavalrymen gradually leaving the verdant canyon, the iron sword in his hand finally fell slowly. He turned to look at the children under the iron canopy and calmly nodded to greet them. Then he looked up at the green mountain. In the morning light, the green mountain was very charming. Unexpectedly, the green mountain saw his response. This chapter could not be divided and could only be written down, so it was a little late. Ning Ke had thought of this sentence when he passed the verdant canyon. This is the second brother I like the green mountain. Tomorrow is Saturday off. I wish everyone a happy weekend. If there are no accidents, it will be at midnight on Sunday. Also, I haven't asked for a monthly ticket this month, so I want to ask for it now. I really think it's written well. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 775. The three northern counties of the Tang Empire were shrouded in a bloody storm. This was the real battlefield. The cavalrymen of the Golden Tribe from the south of the wilderness fought with the cavalrymen of the Tang Empire in the fertile wilderness. The battlefield stretched for hundreds of miles. There were battles and deaths every second. On the battlefield, the priests of the Golden Tribe royal court and the cultivators of the Tang Empire kept fighting. The chi of heaven and earth trembled. Countless cavalrymen charged fearlessly. The wilderness had long been painted red. In the Pamir Mountains, the Tang Empire's western army under the command of General Shu Qing finally defeated the army of the Yueluan Kingdom on the plateau and won a decisive victory after sacrificing more than 20,000 soldiers. Due to the long journey and the shortage of supplies, the Tang Empire's western army did not return to the three northern counties. Instead, they entered the Pamir Mountains and attacked the Yueluan kingdom in the cold weather. The eastern border of the Tang Empire, which had not seen a war for many years, was now in a state of blood and fire. Tens of thousands of grassland cavalrymen were wreaking havoc in the wilderness. 800 cavalrymen led tens of thousands of volunteers and the remnants of the northeast border military who returned from the Yen kingdom. They carried out the fiercest resistance and gradually reversed the extremely passive situation. Fighting on their own land could receive strong support from the temporary government office and the Tang people. Apart from that, the most important reason why the Tang army could reverse the situation so quickly in the eastern border was that the grassland cavalrymen lacked a commander. Prince Long Qing had gotten rid of this group of subordinates many days ago. Long Qing did not leave the battlefield alone. He took with him nearly 1,000 of the most elite cavalrymen of Divine Hall and more than 2,000 absolutely loyal cavalrymen of the left King's palace. The world war against the Tang Empire had been going on for some time. The clear autumn gradually passed and the winter wind gradually rose. The fertile wilderness of the Tang Empire was frozen and hard. Every time the horses stepped on it, there would be smoke and dust. More than 3,000 cavalrymen galloped on the central wilderness of the Tang Empire. From afar, they looked like a yellow dragon. The cavalrymen were already extremely tired after the continuous high-speed attacks. Even Long Qing felt that he could not hold on any longer. But he did not give the order to rest. The main force of the Tang Empire had been mobilized. Other than the ordinary prefectural armies, there was no defense force in the central counties. There was no way they could stop the cavalrymen. At this time, Long Qing and his cavalrymen were close to Chang'an City. Of course, he could not rest. He knew that Chang'an City was about to open and there was no defense in the city. The roads around Chang'an City were covered in dust and footprints. Abandoned luggage could also be seen. These were the traces left behind by the refugees in the surrounding areas. What was fortunate or admirable was that under the joint efforts of the Tang Empire, nearly 1 million refugees were brought into the city in just 2 days. There was not a single corpse on the road. The provisions transported from the various counties had already entered the city even earlier. The surrounding counties and villages had been completely abandoned, fortifying the walls and clearing the field. All the city gates had already been closed, leaving only the southern gate facing Vermilion Bird Avenue open for people to enter and exit. There were few pedestrians outside the city gate, and a few soldiers were vigilantly watching all directions outside the city. Chang'an City was ready for battle, and they were full of confidence. The borders of the country had been broken, but the mountains and rivers were still there. Whether it was the imperial court of the Tang Empire or the people in the city, they all thought that the enemy they were about to face should be the West Hill Divine Palace army going north from the verdant canyon. No one thought that on the official road in the east, Prince Long Qing was leading the cavalry to break through, and no one knew who the real enemy of Chang'an City was. Therefore, they did not understand why the imperial court had never closed the southern gate, and why so many people and resources were mobilized to move the giant stones outside the southern gate at such a critical moment. Only the Academy and the Empress in the palace knew the real reason. The god-stunning array had been damaged. Chang'an City could now resist all kinds of armies, but could not resist the real enemy. The enemy that put Chang'an City in danger was not the cavalry of the Golden Palace, not Long Qing and his cavalry, not the mighty Divine Hall army in the south. It was just one person. A very scary person. A young girl stood outside the southern gate, looking at the giant stones in the field and feeling the familiar smell. Her ponytails swayed gently in the cold wind, and she somewhat missed the past. Ning Ke stood behind her, and his haggard expression finally relaxed a little. Although the blockage of the god-stunning array was still there, it would be much more difficult to enter the city with this stone array tactic. The girl was naturally the Academy's third sister, Yulian. She did not allow herself to immerse in such sentiments for too long, and calmly said, "After all, we still have to repair Chang'an City." Ning Ke said, "Still not enough?" Yulian said, "The headmaster has left the human world. In this world, there are only 4 people who can be called extraordinary. 2 of them don't care about worldly affairs, and the chief preaching monk's law follows the thick soil. So the only one who can threaten Chang'an City is the Abbey Dean. This stone array tactics can at most stop him for a while, but how can it stop him for a lifetime?" Mo Shanshan slightly frowned and seemed a little worried. Ning Ke had never seen the legendary Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey. He thought that eldest brother had delayed this person for a few days, but he did not feel that the person was very powerful. Hearing this, he could not help but frown slightly. Yulian said, "Since the god-stunning array has been broken, if eldest brother did not use his life to stop us, all of us would have been killed by the Abbey Dean, and the war would have been over." Ning Ke said, "Eldest brother and senior sister, you have also broken the 5 states." Yulian said, "The 5 states are just a threshold. Breaking the 5 states does not mean that one is absolutely powerful. Although I have broken the 5 states, I may not be able to defeat Liu Bai. But the Abbey Dean is different." Ning Ke asked, "What's the difference?" Yulian said, "Do you know who is the youngest cultivator to break the 5 states in history?" Mo Shanshan thought for a while and asked, "My sworn brother?" Yulian said, "Eldest brother broke the distance in 3 days, but he was not young at that time. In terms of age, the founder of the Enlightenment doctrine and the great divine priest of light from 600 years ago were both older than him." Ning Ke thought of a possibility, but did not say anything. Yulian said, "The youngest cultivator to break the 5 states was surnamed Shun." Ning Ke looked at the wet stones in front of the south gate and was shocked speechless. "So I am not surprised that Chun Pippi was the earliest to enter the knowing destiny state," Yulian said, "because his surname is also Chun, and he is the Abbey Dean's son." Ning Ke asked after a moment of silence, "What kind of person is the Abbey Dean?" Yulian said, "The Abbey Dean was just an ordinary Taoist in a Taoist temple in the kingdom of Song. He had no talent in cultivation and had never even entered the West Hill Divine Palace. So he gave himself an ordinary name. The kingdom of Song was a small country by the East Sea. It did not have any praiseworthy history, culture, or military. However, it had produced many famous people and great figures. 1,000 years ago, the great divine priest of light was from the kingdom of Song. Wei Guangming was from the kingdom of Song. Master Lotus was from the kingdom of Song. Even the small town where second brother lived as a child should be in the kingdom of Song. Ning Ke did not know until now that the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey was also from the kingdom of Song. Turned out that he had a strange name. "Since I am so amazing, why, I am not famous and even give people a feeling of being ordinary. I am not an ordinary person, but I can give people a feeling of being ordinary. That is the scariest thing about me," Yulian said. "As for the objective reasons, apart from the mysteriousness of the Jishou Abbey, I have been quiet these years mainly because the history of the past decades is a little different." Ning Ke asked, "What is the difference between the history of the past and the history of the past?" Yulian said, "The biggest difference between the history of the past and the history books is that the Academy began to enter the human realm. In the back of the mountain of the Academy, only she did not call him youngest uncle. Instead, she called him Mr. Ku. That was because she was the suzerain of the Devil's Doctrine. After all, the Devil's Doctrine was destroyed by Ku Haoran." Mo Shanshan said softly, "After the trip to the wilderness, I asked the headmaster. He then knew that Master Lotus was still alive. He told me some stories about the past. He said that the Abbey Dean had once fought with Mr. Ku." "That's right," Yulian said. "There were no bystanders in the battle between Mr. Ku and the Abbey Dean. Except for the headmaster, no one in the world knows what happened at that time. They only know that Mr. Ku won in the end. After that, all the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism came out and ambushed Mr. Ku in the wilderness. Mr. Ku slashed them to his heart's content. He broke through several states but refused to stop. So he pulled out his sword and flew towards the sky. He was then killed by Haotian. Because of this, the headmaster was extremely indignant. He went to the West Hill Divine Kingdom and slashed all the peach blossoms on the Peach Mountain. He killed countless powerhouses of Haotian Taoism. The abbey dean invited the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple to help him, but they still failed. Yu Lian said, "The academy entered the human realm, so the abbey dean was nameless." Ning Ke understood what his senior sister said. As the youngest person to break through the 5 realms, Chen Mao undoubtedly had the right to leave his name in the history of cultivation. But because there were 2 other people's names in the history of these years, he did not have a shred of glory. One was the headmaster. The other was Ku Haoran. But from another perspective, it also showed how powerful Chen Mao was. Because he lost to the youngest uncle and the headmaster, but he did not die. He was forced to wander on the South Sea, but he did not die. Maybe the headmaster cherished his talent, or maybe the headmaster really could not kill him. Either way, it proved how powerful he was. The youngest uncle had passed away long ago, and the headmaster had also left the human realm. No one in the human realm was a match for the abbey dean. That person's glory that had been suppressed for many years was about to blossom. The enemy that Chang and City was about to face was such a person. People knew that he was coming, but they did not know when he would come. Ning Ke felt that his shoulders had become a little heavy. He looked over the rugged boulders and fell on the forest beside the official road. Chang and City had entered winter. The grass was not thick and the wind and snow were coming. Don't laugh, everyone. A man's self-esteem is easy to make a joke at the wrong moment. I had a hard time writing today, and I hope it will be done soon. Now it seems that my cervical vertebra is affected. Oh, the reason for not updating is very positive. I hope that the abbey dean's battle can also be written with positive energy. I lay down more and I hope to write faster. I'm really sorry and I apologize again because I did not manage myself well. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 776. Yu Lian continued. He had another adventure after coming to the South Sea. Although no one knows the details, the headmaster once sighed with emotion when he saw Pippi when he was still a child. Ning Ke was slightly stunned and said, "The great divine priest of light who disappeared in the South Sea 600 years ago?" Yu Lian said, "Yes. I always think he has gained a lot from this." Ning Ke looked at the stones in front of the south gate and kept silent for a long time. He still felt a little unwilling and asked, "Senior brother and senior sister together, can't we defeat him?" The headmaster once said that life is a cultivation. Yu Lian said, "Sometimes cultivation depends on time. He's lived longer than my senior brother and I, so he's naturally stronger than us. Although my senior brother is talented, he's too gentle. Even if he learned how to fight, he'd still be no match for him." She did not comment on herself, which was also a tacit agreement. Ning Ke also thought of a very troublesome and crucial problem. Third sister was still injured, and it might be a very serious injury. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace was a powerhouse beyond the 5-state. Although she was the most mysterious and powerful 23-year cicada cultivation, she had to pay a price to defeat that person. In the current situation, the only thing that could defeat the abbey dean of the Jishou Abbey was the god-stunning array. Ning Ke turned around and walked into the city gate, continuing his journey to solve the problem. As time went by, the chi of heaven and earth in Chang and became more and more stagnant because of the stone array tactics outside the south gate. Especially the dark line between life and death, it was very blocked. Ning Ke walked on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, walking in the block chi of heaven and earth. Countless refugees who evacuated into Chang'an were arranged by the imperial court and the marketplace to live in various residences. There were few pedestrians on the long street, and most of the shops and restaurants along the street were closed. The street was no longer bustling with people. The cold winter wind blew back and forth in the street, making it particularly deserted. The Great Blockage Formation outside the south gate played a very small role. Although it could block the Aberdeen, it was confirmed that it was impossible to break through the blocked God-stunning array in a short time. Then where could he mobilize so much chi of heaven and earth to repair the God-stunning array? This problem had been bothering him for a long time. He had not slept or rested for several days and nights, racking his brains. Occasionally, he would feel something and even have a specific idea, but he could not find a way to implement it. How can those illusory auras turn into real power? Ning Ke looked at the vermilion bird painting in the middle of the street and asked. The vermilion bird did not reply because it did not know either. Ning Ke turned around and continued walking. He thought of the steamed bun shop he had seen on the shore of Yenming Lake that morning, the hot mist on the bluestone, and the realization he had at that time. His mood became more and more depressed. He vaguely understood what he had to do, but he did not know how to do it. He saw hope in front of him, but he didn't know how to grasp it. He saw the other shore, but there was no boat, so his worries grew. He walked out of a quiet alley and suddenly heard the sound of reading coming from behind the wall. Some private tutor was lecturing the students on the laws of the Tang Empire. Judging from their voices, the students were still very young. Their clear and childish voices recited the complicated laws of the Tang Empire. Their voices were uneven, but they were very focused. It was interesting and touching. Seeing that the country was about to fall and the family was about to perish, the sounds of reading could still be heard in the streets. He could still hear the laws of the Tang Empire. This calmness was very touching and even awe-inspiring, because there was a kind of power in this calmness. Ning Ke stood outside the wall and quietly listened to the sound of reading. He listened for a long time. This was the aura of the human world. But how to make this power tangible? The Southern Gate Temple in front of the Imperial Palace was very quiet. Because of the tampering of the edict and He Mingqi, the attitude of the Imperial Court of the Tang Empire towards the Southern Gate Temple had changed greatly. There were many people hiding outside the Taoist temple, and it was very chilling. Ning Ke walked up the stairs and entered the Southern Gate Temple. The Taoists in the Taoist temple saw him, and could not help but be shocked. Then they came forward and bowed. He was the disciple of Master Yen Sei, and the Taoists in the Southern Gate Temple called him senior brother. Ning Ke waved his hand and motioned for the crowd to ignore him. He walked into the quiet Taoist temple alone and stood under the wall. He looked at the stories in the scriptures and the mythical legends, and kept silent for a long time. Religion was best at turning the aura of the human world into real power. This was also the so-called power of faith. Although the power of faith of Haotian Taoism was used to pray to Haotian and connect the heaven and the earth to the divine man, which was completely opposite to what he wanted to do now. He wanted to see if he could get some kind of inspiration. Ning Ke walked around Chang'an just like that summer when he first understood talisman. So he came to Wanyan Tower again, and climbed up the Wanyan Tower. Standing by the small window at the top of the tower and looking at the quiet Chang'an city, he asked, "Can people's thoughts really be transformed into concrete power? If so, how do we go through it?" Thoughts themselves have no power, but once they are displayed, they may show some kind of power. Just like His Majesty's Imperial Edict, if it is only a thought in the mind, it will have no effect. Only when he says it out or writes it on paper will his thoughts have any effect. Master Huang Yang walked to his side and looked at the last flock of autumn geese gradually flying south. He said, "If the way you asked about is equivalent to a method, then language is a method, and writing is also a method. Ning Ke asked, "What about faith?" Master Huang Yang said, "Faith itself has no power. It needs a specific direction. When countless people's faith is concentrated in that direction, the power will be reflected in that direction." Buddha strictly forbids his disciples from setting up idols because of this. Master Huang Yang looked at him and continued, "Your master Yen Sei once said that everyone's thoughts are actually a talisman, but they are too weak to be felt. When everyone writes a talisman at the same time, this talisman may appear, or even become great." Ning Ke understood something. It was really possible to find a way to summon the power of the human world that could compete with heaven and earth. If he could find that power, he could unblock the God-stunning array. He came to the south bank of Yanming Lake and sat among the frosty grass. He stretched his fingers into the air and copied a few inscriptions. When he calmed down, he began to write and began to look for that word. Having entered the knowing destiny state, any word he wrote was a talisman. Writing was writing talisman. The word he was looking for was actually a talisman. The sun gradually moved west and then fell below the city wall. Night came. He sat by the lake and continued to write talisman. He searched for the word and the talisman. Hundreds of words. Thousands of words. Finally, there was only one word left. That word was formed by two straight lines. It was the only divine talisman he knew, the two horizontal talisman. He kept writing the two horizontal talisman until he was exhausted. His eyes brightened and dimmed, then brightened and dimmed again, and finally became numb. After an unknown amount of time, he stopped writing. He looked at the courtyard across the Yanming Lake in a daze. At this moment, a snowflake drifted down and landed on his body. He thought of the snow that year. He thought of the battle on the snow lake. Sang Sang held the big black umbrella and stood in the wind and snow, singing to the snow lake. If Sang Sang was still there, if the big black umbrella and iron arrows were still there, he was really confident that even if he could not unblock Chang'an City, he could use the God-stunning array to kill that man. However, Sang Sang was already dead. The courtyard across the lake had no lights for many days. The people sent by the imperial court to the Sisui River reported that the big black horse and carriage had disappeared. He had to find the word that could mobilize the power of the human world. The snowflakes continued to fall. A few eyelashes fluttered down. His face was pale, but his cheeks were flushed, which looked extremely unhealthy. He looked calm, but in fact, he was extremely anxious and tired. He could not find the word, and he could not write the talisman. Master Yen Sei spent his whole life to find the talisman, let alone him. Ning Ke sighed. A white mist. He raised his finger, continued to write, and continued to search. He wrote in the white mist, in the falling snow, and on the ground that was gradually covered with snow. Because of fatigue and nervousness, his hand trembled more and more severely. The two strokes of the two horizontal talisman sometimes became a little crooked. It snowed in Chang'an City. This was the first snow in the 18th year of Tianqi. The first snow. The night gradually faded and the morning came. The streets and eaves of the city were covered with white snow, and it was very clean. Last night the wind came from the north, and the south of the city was quiet. Because there was no cold wind, the southern city wall was covered with a light layer of snow. It looked like a white curtain. Suddenly, there was a footprint in the thin snow on the city wall. It was about 100 feet from the ground. The goshawk could build its nest, but people could not. But there was one more footprint. After a moment, another footprint appeared in the thin snow on the city wall hundreds of feet away. Then, a pair of footprints appeared behind it. The two footprints belonged to two people. The winter eagle was awakened by the footsteps on the city wall. It looked into the distant sky warily. The footprints of the two people were clearly on the city wall. But it looked into the sky. On the endless city wall of Chang'an, the footprints of the two people appeared from time to time. No one could be seen. Only footprints could be seen. It was like the traces left by immortals in the human world. The footprints gradually reached the south gate. In the light snowflakes, a touch of indigo appeared. The Abbey Dean of the Jisho Abbey appeared outside the south gate. A Taoist sword was carried on his back. He had not slept for 7 days, and he had traveled tens of thousands of miles between mountains and rivers, but he was still refreshed. Suddenly, a wooden stick appeared in the snow. The wooden stick was very short, very hard. The wooden stick hit the back of the Abbey Dean's head. The Abbey Dean waved his sword. The sword and the wooden stick met. There was a loud sound. The sound was melodious and loud. The sound was loud. Chang'an City woke up. The bell in the city rang loudly. Maybe it was because of the sound of the bell, or because of the collision between the sword and the wooden stick, or because of that person. The thin snow on the southern city wall, which was more than 10 miles long, rustled down. It revealed the black color of the city wall. There was a lot of snow under the city wall. Like a falling curtain, it piled up in one place. I like the last scene very much. It would be beautiful if it was made into a movie. Roll call. This chapter is almost over. I hope it can return to normal as soon as possible. Now you can scold me all you want. I also want to scold the days when it takes 6 hours to write a chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 777. The snow fell like a curtain and fell at the foot of the city wall, forming a snow line about half a man's height in front of the south gate. A scholar came and stood in front of the snow line silently. He was still wearing the old cotton-padded jacket, but now it was full of cuts made by swords. Hundreds of cotton flowers squeezed out of it and shivered in the snow wind. Some of the blood that he had shed over the past few days had been blown away by the wind between the mountains and rivers, but most of it had coagulated on the cotton that had bloomed, making it look extremely black and ugly. In addition, the wooden stick in his hand had many shallow sword marks on it, making him look like a beggar who had been chased by a vicious dog for many days. Although his appearance was a little disheveled, his expression was still calm, giving off a feeling of cleanliness from the inside out, just like the slowly falling first snow. He looked at the Abbey Dean and said, "Chang'an is the last place the Academy chose." The Abbey Dean looked at him and said, "I chose this place first." Eldest brother asked, "Why?" The Abbey Dean said, "Because this city can no longer stop me." Eldest brother asked, "Then why did you come so late?" "Because this city can't stop me until now." The Abbey Dean held the Taoist sword in his hand and looked at the magnificent city in front of him. He said, "The Academy is waiting, and so am I. You are waiting for this city to recover, and I am waiting for it to weaken." Eldest brother said, "It seems that you have waited for the result you wanted." The Abbey Dean said, "Don't be surprised about this result. I have prepared for many years to break this array. Since the headmaster left the human world, no one can change the course. No matter if we follow or not, we can't go against the will of heaven." He looked at eldest brother in front of the snow line and said, "This snow line can't stop me, and neither can the Academy. I will kill you and destroy the god-stunning array. Then everything will be over." After saying this, he walked towards Chang'an. The road outside the south gate was covered with a shallow layer of snow. The Abbey Dean's right foot had just touched the ground, and he did not even leave a mark on the snow. He only took one step, or more precisely, half a step. The Abbey Dean looked down at the ground. He was wearing cloth shoes. There was a small stone beside the cloth shoes. He looked at the stone and frowned slightly. Then, he withdrew his right foot and returned to his original position. The Abbey Dean looked around and noticed that thousands of stones had appeared around the south gate of Chang'an City. The stones were of different sizes, sharp edges, and round like eggs. However, no matter what shape the stone was, all of them gave off an extremely strong sense of stubbornness and injustice. The aura seemed so silent and unwilling, and it seemed as if it wanted to fill the entire world. That aura was so distinct, so silent, and so firm that the aura of heaven and earth in the south of Chang'an City was forcibly stuffed with countless obstacles, making it difficult to breathe. Because of the existence of these stones, the naturally existing dark passageways between heaven and earth became as difficult as breathing. In other words, there was no limitless in this world of stones. The first snow fell overnight. The thousands of stones in the south of Chang'an looked like soldiers in white armor, while the big stones were like the snowfield wolves in the north, full of killing intent. The Abbey Dean looked at the stones and suddenly laughed. He had been to the Daming Lake in the wilderness more than once, so he naturally knew about the stone array tactic. Using the stone array tactics to break the limitless state, the Academy was really interesting. But why would he be afraid? He didn't step forward. He stood quietly among the stones, waiting for the Academy's next move. Eldest brother took a step forward and disappeared in the light snow. The Abbey Dean knew that he didn't enter the limitless state, but the stone array tactics blocked the light and sight. In the rugged stone array, they couldn't see each other, so he did nothing but wait quietly for the Academy to attack him. The snow was still falling slowly, and it was faint and beautiful. But when it was about to fall on the ground, it suddenly disappeared, and then fell dozens of feet away, or even hundreds of feet away. It felt very strange. A thin piece of snow fell along the black city wall and fell on the Abbey Dean outside the city. Along with the snow, a short wooden stick also fell. The wooden stick broke the wind silently, and even the blocked aura between heaven and earth were not affected at all. It followed the natural flow of the wind and snow and arrived without a trace. The Abbey Dean's eyes slightly brightened. The wooden stick seemed simple and ordinary, but in his eyes, it was more amazing than the Great Blockage Formation. He just learned to fight a few days ago, and now he could display such a state. When it came to learning speed, who in the world could be compared with him? The Abbey Dean raised his sword to face the wind and snow in front of him, thinking that if the headmaster of the Academy had ascended to heaven 10 years later, with such a terrifying learning speed, he might not be able to suppress him like now. The Taoist's sword broke the wind and snow, and then it hit the wooden stick in the seemingly empty falling snow. This was the second time that the sword and the stick met since they came to Chang'an. Different from the shocking scene of falling snow in the city when they first met, this time the sword and the stick met. It seemed so quiet and gentle, like the first snow falling into the lake, about to melt. Thousands of stones in front of the south gate emitted a rugged and stiff aura. When the sword and the stick met, a very gentle aura instantly diluted the aura of the stone array tactics. The sword and the stick met in the air at a point and remained still. In the space of dozens of feet around that point, everything was still, whether it was the wind or the snow. The snowflakes stopped falling and stayed still in the air. The scene was extremely strange. Then the snowflakes broke, starting from the edge, until the center of the snowflakes was broken into the finest powder. The powder-like snow fell down and sprinkled on the Abbey Dean and eldest brother. The eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket was torn again, and blood flowed out again. The wind and snow rose from the ground and blew around him, like a pair of invisible wings, pushing his wounded body back like flowing snow, out of the stone array tactics and into Chang'an. The Abbey Dean frowned slightly and was a little surprised. There was the stone array tactics in the south of the city. There was no distance in the eyes, but there was distance. This had a great impact on him and an even greater impact on the other party. But since the Academy had found a way to break the limitless, there must be a follow-up method. So he let the powder snow fall on him, and was ready for the Academy's next move. However, the Academy did nothing, and directly retreated into Chang'an. In this case, he had to enter Chang'an. To enter Chang'an, he had to break through the rugged rocks in front of him. The Abbey Dean waved his sleeves, rolling up layers of snow like flowing clouds. Beside the state highway, a huge rock weighing tens of thousands of kilograms was lifted up by the wind of his sleeves, and fell far away in the field. He waved his sleeves again, and another huge rock flew up. He walked toward the city gate. Along the way, he rolled up his sleeves like clouds, and destroyed rocks and formations along the way. How to cast stone array tactics. When Cuchulainn entered the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, he broke it with his sword. But he rolled it up with his sleeves. This did not mean that the current Abbey Dean was stronger than Cuchulainn. Most importantly, the Great Blockage Formation in the south of the city was far less powerful than the one at the bottom of the Daming Lake. As the leader of Taoism, he had a deep understanding of the Devil's Doctrine. He knew that the real stone array tactics must be a world made up of stubborn rock. Although there were thousands of stubborn rocks in the south of the city, it was not a world. If it was not a complete world, there would be space. If there was space, there would be walking, and there would be more space. Outside the city, there was the sound of falling rock. The wind and snow gradually stopped, and the indigo robe was approaching. On the city wall, Mo Shanshan's hair was covered with snowflakes, and her lips were bleeding. Her face was slightly pale. The Abbey Dean waved his sleeves casually, and the stone array tactics was broken. Walking through the south gate, he entered Chang'an. There was no pedestrian on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. It was extremely quiet, and only the snow kept falling. The Abbey Dean walked on the straight Vermilion Bird Avenue, looking relaxed. He looked at the buildings beside the avenue, the carvings in the middle of the street that were not completely covered by the snow, the black eaves and the old tiles covered with snow. He looked like an ordinary tourist. So Chang'an is like this. Many years ago, when he was still a child, he once came to Chang'an with the elders of his family. But it was too long ago, and he had no specific memory of this city. Later, he began to cultivate Taoism, and never came to Chang'an again. Because he became very powerful as soon as he began to cultivate Taoism. Without an invitation, Chang'an would not allow him to enter. More importantly, the headmaster of academy had always been in the academy in the south of Chang'an. What was unobtainable was the best. Whether it was cultivation, men and women, or anything else, it was the same. So he liked Chang'an very much. Unfortunately, this city did not belong to him, so he had to destroy it. He had been thinking about this city for many years. He had been thinking about destroying this city for many years. Today, he finally entered this city. He could not help but sigh. He looked up at the falling snow and said, "If you see this scene from the sky, will you regret leaving this world too early?" At this moment, cicadas suddenly chirped on the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The snowflakes falling from the sky seemed to have a layer of brightness, and became thin cicada wings. It was winter, and the first snow had arrived. Where did the cicadas come from? The Abbey Dean slightly tilted his head and listened carefully. Finally, a serious look appeared in his eyes. After confirming that the stone array tactics could not stop him, he decisively gave up and let the academy retreat into Chang'an, using the power of the city itself. The person who could make such a decision was certainly not an ordinary person. He knew that there must be some interesting people waiting for him in Chang'an, but he did not expect that it would be so interesting. It turned out that this was the last confidence of the academy. There are cicadas in the west. They hide in the mud for 23 years, and only wake up when the snow melts and floods come. They take a bath in the mud, dry their wings in the cold wind, and fly out of the void. The Abbey Dean looked at the wind and snow on the other side of the street and said calmly, "So you are here." The snow clouds thickened and covered the sky. The shrill chirping of cicadas resounded through Chang'an. A little girl walked out of the wind and snow. "I'm really not in good health. I need to ask for leave for the new year in February. So please vote for the more diligent writers. I will try to do it well after the meeting in early March. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 778. At the level of the Abbey Dean, although he could not predict the future with a pinch of his fingers, He could predict the future with a slight movement of his mind. A normal sneak attack would be meaningless unless Ninkei was still holding the iron bow. Yulien did not hide her trace and just walked out of the wind and snow. I can't communicate with Haotian in this city. She looked at the Abbey Dean and said. Then she stretched out her hands in the air. She had reached the advanced level of the 23-year cicada cultivation. Her tender and beautiful little hands looked like two slightly bigger snowflakes in the wind and snow. With this movement, the snowflakes suddenly stopped and then continued to fall. However, they were no longer lightly floating. Instead, each snowflake began to shake violently and dance in the wind. The snowflakes vibrated at a high speed and made a low and dense sound, like countless cicadas flapping their wings at the same time. There was a yellow leaf on the eaves beside the street. It was swept into the snow by the wind and instantly torn into pieces. I didn't expect that you have already reached the divine demon realm and become the first person in the devil's doctrine to break through the 5 states in 100 years. You should know that even Lotus could not break through the ordeal of heart and did not dare to take that step until his death. Lin Wu, you are indeed extraordinary. The Abbey Dean looked up at the sky and watched the falling snowflakes. He thought of that person and showed an expression of admiration. Anyone who could take the 23-year cicada cultivation as a disciple was worthy of admiration. Fortunately, it took me my whole life to finally make a crack in this city, he said with emotion, and then reached out his palm in the air. His palm was facing the sky as if he was going to receive the falling snowflakes. However, it was not snowflakes that fell, but a majestic power. The thick snow clouds covered Chang and city. The majestic power came from the sky, from the sun behind the clouds. When the inhuman power came to the human world, the god-stunning array reacted in the shortest time. Dozens of vigorous auras emerged from the streets and alleys of Chang and city and poured into the snow clouds. However, the god-stunning array was damaged and the chi of heaven and earth on the Vermilion Bird Avenue slowed down. The majestic power fell on Chang and city. The thick snow clouds in the sky were instantly torn apart, leaving a straight crack in the sky. Below the snow cloud crack was a perfectly straight long street. At this moment, standing on Vermilion Bird Avenue and looking up at the sky, one could see a magical scene. A crack had appeared in the middle of the snow clouds that covered the sky, and within the crack was the azure sky. Clear and beautiful sunlight shone down from the blue sky, illuminating the long street. The buildings and the snowflakes on the street were incomparably clear, even smeared with a layer of holy golden light. The snowflakes in the sky turned golden and melted at a speed visible to the naked eye. The sunlight seeping through the clouds and the majestic power were about to fall on the Abbey Dean. This was the power above the 5 states. This was the true divine art of Taoism, Tianqi. Yu Lian stood in the wind and snow, her black ponytail swaying gently. She felt that the snowflakes were a little cold. She had also surpassed the threshold of the 5 states. She had seen Xiong Chumo use Tianqi. But she did not think that there was someone in this world who could so easily use a technique above Realm 5, as if it was as simple as picking up a snowflake. She looked at the number 1 person of Haotian Taoism on the opposite side of the street, and suddenly lowered her head. She looked at the snow in front of her shoes, and began to write with her eyes. She wrote very attentively. The headmaster had asked her to write for many years, and what she wrote was her own world. When the first stroke appeared on the snow, her own world appeared on the snow street. The snowflakes danced wildly in the sky, their edges rubbing against the air at a high speed. The cicadas chirped louder and louder. Billions of snowflakes turned into transparent wings and flew rapidly, covering the sky above the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The clear light from the cracks in the clouds fell on the wing-like snowflakes and began to refract. There seemed to be countless golden leaves in the sky above Chang and city. A very faint but powerful aura covered the entire snow street along with the dancing snowflakes. In the world of Haotian, a brand new world was created. Not a single snowflake fell, not a single ray of sunlight fell. The snowflakes stopped melting. The snow street became cold and quiet again. The clear shadow covered the Abbey Dean's body. The Abbey Dean looked at the little girl in the wind and snow quietly. It was not until this moment that he realized that her real state had reached such a level. He raised his right hand and pointed at her on the other side of the snow street. 4 fingers gradually bent. However, before he could point out with his index finger, a violent roar suddenly came from the wind and snow. It was the sound of some round object rubbing against the air at a high speed. An object came from the north of Chang'an City, spinning at a high speed, breaking the wind and shaking the snow. It was unstoppable. The Wanyan Pagoda was in the north of the city. It was a string of Buddha beads. It was Master Huang Yang's Buddha beads. The Buddha beads spun at a high speed in the wind and snow. There were faint traces of blood on them, which should be the master's painstaking efforts. Many years ago, Huang Yang was enlightened in the depths of the West Wilderness because of his companion's hot blood. So the string of Buddha beads stained with his painstaking efforts was also very hot. So hot that it was burning. An extremely merciful yet extremely violent fire attribute spat out towards the surrounding snow and wind as the prayer beads spun. Everything it touched was set ablaze. When the snowflakes touched the Buddha beads, they did not melt into water, but directly turned into nothingness. Master Huang Yang was the Vedanta of the Buddhism sect and one of the few powerhouses in the world. The string of Buddha beads stained with his painstaking efforts was a great threat to the weakest Taoist heart of Taoism powerhouses. A line of fire appeared over the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. It whistled through the air, and then suddenly became quiet. The burning Buddha beads were put on the Abbey Dean's wrist. Yulian looked up. There were snowflakes falling deep in her childish eyes. Her academy uniform was fluttering. The aura of heaven and earth on the snow street trembled a little. Someone was about to appear. At this moment, the Abbey Dean was cut off from Haotian by the cicada's world and restrained by Master Huang Yang's burning Buddha beads. There was no way for him to leave the snow street, even if he had no distance in his eyes. This was the Academy's arrangement. The next moment was the real attack. However, the Abbey Dean still looked calm. He looked at the string of Buddha beads on his wrist. The Buddha beads were burning, but even his green Taoist robe was not ignited. As his gaze fell, a thought flashed through his mind. The coldness of nirvana from ancient times followed his gaze and fell on the burning Buddha beads. The flame on the Buddha beads suddenly went out, as if they had become a dead wooden ball. This was nirvana. Above the 5 states. In a flash, 2 states above the 5 states appeared on the snow street. They both came from the Abbey Dean. But he was still on the snow street, in the wind and snow, in Yulian's world, unable to leave. A pair of footprints appeared on the snow hundreds of feet away. The snowflakes fell on the cotton jacket and then disappeared. It was the cotton jacket that disappeared in the wind and snow. The eldest brother made his move. The Abbey Dean slightly raised his eyebrows. His right hand, like a pine tree facing the wind, held the string of Buddha beads on his wrist, and then disappeared. Half of the snow street was a small world. The cotton jacket and the green Taoist robe appeared and disappeared in the wind and snow, appearing everywhere. They suddenly appeared at the edge of the snow well on the North Street, and when they reappeared, they were next to the shops in the south. The Abbey Dean and the eldest brother were chasing on the snow street. They were chasing in the limitless state. In such a small area, they were moving at a speed faster than thinking. It was just a moment, but it was more dangerous than the 6 days of chasing between mountains and rivers. The wind and snow rose again. Yulian's black ponytail swayed again. She looked calm and focused, and the snowflakes in her clear eyes were getting thicker. She activated the divine demon realm to the extreme. Countless snowflakes danced above the Vermilion Bird Avenue, and each snowflake was a cicada. The sky was full of snowflakes and cicadas. Countless horrible killing intents were on the snow street. This half of the snow street was her world. No matter how fast the Abbey Dean was, he could not be faster than the rules of the world itself. A snowflake fell slowly in front of the deputy yeoman of the Clearwater Department of the Ministry of Revenue. There was nothing there. But when the snowflake fell, there was a tearing sound. The Abbey Dean was forced out by the wind and snow. There was a sharp tear on the front of his green Taoist robe. On the top of the Wanyan Pagoda, Master Huang Yang sat cross-legged, chanting scriptures with his palms pressed together. Blood dripped in front of him like turbid tears. Under the stone pagoda, dozens of monks were kneeling in the snow, chanting scriptures as well. The string of Buddha beads on the Abbey Dean's right wrist was no longer burning. But it did not fall. The Buddha beads became extremely red, as beautiful as pomegranate seeds. There was a faint chanting in the wind and snow. The Buddha beads were shrinking. The stone steps in front of the yamen were covered with snow. The eldest brother appeared at the foot of the steps and hit the Abbey Dean's head with his cudgel. The Abbey Dean looked serious. He pulled out his sword and slashed. The eldest brother's feet sank into the snow. Blood oozed from the corner of his mouth. But he did not retreat. He waved his cudgel again. The Abbey Dean raised his sword and slashed again. It seemed simple, but it was not. The sword and the cudgel were both waved in the distanceless state, which had gone beyond the concept of speed. In a very short time, the sword and the cudgel had met countless times. The eldest brother's cotton-padded gown was covered with blood, and the cudgel had many shallow sword marks. The Abbey Dean looked more and more serious. At the other end of the snow street, Yulien suddenly took a step forward. The snowflakes fell on the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean waved his sleeves. The cicadas suddenly stopped chirping, and the wind and snow dispersed. It was a mess. Not a single snowflake could fall on him. The Abbey Dean held his sword horizontally and retreated. Then he raised his palm to the sky. Countless majestic forces fell from the sky, from the cracks in the clouds, like lightning, falling into the sky full of snowflakes, landing on the transparent world barrier. The snow street shook, and the snow on the eaves fell like a waterfall. Yulien grunted and stopped in her tracks. The Abbey Dean threw the Taoist's sword into the wind and snow. Then he appeared in front of the eldest brother and blocked the cudgel. He only used one thumb. The cudgel shook uneasily, and the aura of heaven and earth was in chaos. The eldest brother retreated to the other end of the snow street, coughing painfully while holding his chest. The Abbey Dean looked at his right wrist again. The red Buddha beads were still shrinking, and were about to sink into his flesh. He frowned slightly, as if he was unhappy. The wind and snow suddenly stopped. The Abbey Dean's body seemed to have become countless times bigger. In fact, he just stood in the wind and snow quietly. However, there was a vast and boundless aura that was as vast as the sea that instantly filled the entire space. The Buddha beads suddenly broke. Dozens of Buddha beads flew away in the air. Several round holes appeared on the gate of the Qinshui Bureau. Not far away, a wall collapsed and smoke rose slightly. The Buddha beads were very hot. Although they were not burning, they started fire when they touched wood. The wind and snow were still blowing and the fire was dying out. On the top of the Wanyan Tower, Master Huang Yang held his chest in pain, and his palms were full of blood. He looked at the snow street in the south, and said in a trembling voice, "It's immeasurable. The supreme skill of the Buddhism sect. Immeasurable. It was also above the 5 states. Tomorrow is Saturday off. I took the opportunity to go to the hospital for a checkup. I should have had a follow-up in the last 3 months last year, but I was too busy and forgot to finish a course of treatment. I am so irresponsible. I wish you all a happy weekend. I wish you all good health and be responsible for yourselves." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 779. There was a crack on the stone window of the Wanyan Pagoda, caused by a sword. Snowflakes drifted in through the broken window and fell on Master Huang Yang's blood-stained kasaya. But the sword had disappeared. Yulien felt the sharp sword style coming back from behind. She frowned and waved her hand to sweep the snowflakes into the sky to resist the falling divine light of Tianqi. Then she finally took a step forward. She looked like a cute and ordinary little girl. But as she took a step forward, her aura suddenly changed greatly, as if she had turned into an army of thousands of men and horses. Her feet did not seem to be stepping on the shallow snow on the street, but on the vast wilderness. Her feet were like hammers and the earth was like a drum. The ground of southern city shook along with her footsteps. The wind and snow dissipated. Yulien broke through the wind and blew the snow away. In an instant, she took only one step forward and arrived in front of the Qinshui agency's yamen dozens of feet away. She punched at the Abbey Dean's face. Her fist was very small and looked as cute as cotton candy. But the Abbey Dean's expression suddenly became extremely serious, even more serious than when he saw Yulien display the divine demon realm, which was above the 5 states. Because Yulien was not only the third sister of the Academy, but also the Grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine. Her fist represented the foundation of the Devil's Doctrine, which was power. As the most talented Grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine in 1,000 years, Yulien in this state was undoubtedly qualified to be called a Grandmaster of the generation. She was qualified to challenge powerhouses of any state. The Abbey Dean was very clear that the small fist that broke through the snow looked harmless and even a little weak. But if the fist landed on something, it could knock down a mountain. There was no wind when the palm was raised, but it was as soft as a thin snow falling into the lake. The Abbey Dean stretched out his right palm and blocked Yulien's fist. He was not knocked down by the small but terrifying fist, because he was not a mountain or a river. He was an ocean that could hold hundreds of rivers, and he was the air that filled the world. Looking at the palm in front of the fist and the Abbey Dean who was close to her, Yulien's childish face showed no emotion. She was extremely calm, which gave her a sense of enchantment. With a snap, the snow on the ground of the long street bounced off the ground. Countless cracks appeared on the hard bluestone ground like a spider web. Yulien's right foot that fell behind stepped on the center of the spider web. The power that she had been accumulating for 23 years seemed endless. It gushed out from her petite body to the street. Her black ponytail was shaken loose and fluttered behind her like a whip, lashing the snowflakes miserably. Streams of energy were like sharp blades that carved deep marks on the wall. She did not use the heavenly demonic realm, nor did she create another small world. She did not use any mysterious methods. She only used her simplest and most reliable method to coldly throw it over. Dharma. She used, and she used it. Dharma. On the snowy street, there was only the whistling of power. In that instant, even the natural energy of the universe was forced to flee into the distance by the power of this petite body. Under such circumstances, the Abbey Dean could not enter the distanceless state even if she withdrew the small world. He could only face her fist and resist her power. She was the Grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine. She seemed weak, but she had the most powerful power in the world. She believed that even the Abbey Dean could only run away from her power. Because no matter how much it looked like an ocean, it was not a real ocean. What could you do when you couldn't run away? On the street, the pure and absolute power roared. The Abbey Dean's Taoist bun was cut off. His long hair danced behind his green Taoist robe. He looked embarrassed. Yulien looked at him. She wanted to know the answer. She would know the answer soon. The Abbey Dean's hair fell in front of his eyes. His eyes were as calm as an ancient well. Then, a snowflake floated in front of his eyes. It went through his eyelashes and his black pupils. The pure white snowflake seemed to enter his black pupils. The color of his black pupils gradually faded. Or, the snowflake in his eyes became darker. It was gray. The Abbey Dean's eyes turned gray and misty. The deep well that was not afraid of wind and rain became a skeleton at the bottom of the well. The Abbey Dean's eyes became gray. Yulien felt her power draining away like the wind. Her face turned pale. At this moment, she thought of a certain rumor, and her eyes suddenly went cold while a strand of unrestrainable rage arose in her heart. She was not going to stop. After she entered the academy, the headmaster only taught her one thing. That was writing. Writing was a world of its own. It was also a way to purify one's mind and control one's anger. Because the headmaster knew that she liked to get angry, especially after she became a girl. So she had never been angry in the past 23 years. But she was very angry now. She had always hated the scumbags in Taoism. The Abbey Dean was undoubtedly the worst scumbag in Taoism. When he used the modified Enlightenment doctrine to deal with her, the Grandmaster of the Enlightenment doctrine, she was extremely angry. The Abbey Dean looked at her eyes quietly. His eyes were so gray, so calm, and so dead. The snowflakes dancing on the street fell to the ground miserably, as if they had lost the support of the airflow. They were like cicadas whose wings were torn off. If things went on like this, either the Abbey Dean would win with the gray eyes first, or Yulian would kill him before her power disappeared. The probability of the latter was about 20%, but Yulian's anger was suppressed by the headmaster for 23 years. Once it was ignited, it could start a prairie fire. So she wanted to bet on the 20%. More importantly, she was very clear that she could only have the 20% chance by following her heart's desire to fight for 23 years. Once she missed it, she did not know if she would have the chance again. There was one person who was not willing to bet on the 20% chance for Yulian. Because he was the eldest brother. If he was in a desperate situation and had to gamble with his life, he thought he should be the one to do it. He could not let his junior sister do it. In the wind and snow, the old cotton-padded jacket appeared in front of Yulian. It also appeared in front of the Abbey Dean's gray eyes. The old cotton-padded jacket was stained with blood, but still clean. Just like the scholar in the cotton-padded jacket, who had traveled thousands of mountains and rivers and was covered with dust, but still clean. It was pure and clean. Without any color, it could not be dyed or stolen by you. The old cotton-padded jacket fluttered in the wind. The eldest brother's breath was calm and did not overflow. He raised the wooden stick in his hand. The Abbey Dean took a step back. The eldest brother picked up the wooden stick and knocked on the street covered with light snow. Every hit was a wooden fence. He was the first disciple of the headmaster of the academy. He knew the god-stunning array better than anyone else. As he knocked, he borrowed the aura of heaven and earth in Chang'an. After several hits, a thick city wall that had weathered thousands of years of wind and rain appeared on the snowy street. The Abbey Dean was on the other side of the city wall. He and Yulian were on the other side of the city wall. The Abbey Dean reached into the snowy sky and grabbed the Taoist sword that flew back from the Wanyan Tower. Then he raised the sword and stabbed at the city wall in front of him. His sword strike was similar to Yulian's punch earlier. It was extremely pure and extremely powerful. There was no power, only Taoism. The Taoist sword carried the sword Taoism that he had been immersed in for a lifetime. The city wall suddenly broke. A clear sword mark appeared on the wooden stick. The sword edge rolled over the wooden stick like the wind and snow, and stabbed into the eldest brother's left shoulder. The sword edge went into the cotton jacket for 3 inches, and blood started to appear. Yulian reached out and grabbed the eldest brother's waist, like catching a cat. She was extremely powerful, so she was extremely fast. The sword edge moved forward, but it was gradually pulled out from the cotton jacket, because her hand was faster than the Abbey Dean's sword. The eldest brother's straw sandals slid on the snow. He raised the stick and hit again. The Abbey Dean looked calm and raised the sword to stab again. Yulian whistled, and the snow under the eaves collapsed. The roar that burst forth from her petite body was like a thunderclap that descended from the heavens. She withdrew all her power, and then concentrated it on her right fist and punched forward. The wind and snow covered the gap of the god-stunning array like cicada wings, refracting the sunlight and emitting a golden luster, like countless golden leaves. At this moment, Yu Lian withdrew her aura, and her world naturally collapsed. The golden snowflakes above Chang'an burned violently, so beautiful that it made people's hearts palpitate. The snow was burning. The snow was finally melted and a crack appeared. The majestic power from the sky finally fell on the snowy street. A field of light, boundless light, covered everything. The three auras, with their own invincible power or the majestic chi of heaven and earth, collided together. The wind and snow roared, the walls and eaves were broken, and the houses along the street were all shaken into ruins. The wind and snow gradually calmed down. The eldest brother and Yu Lian had retreated to the north street hundreds of feet away. The eldest brother was covered in blood, especially the sword wound on his shoulder, which looked particularly terrible. Yu Lian was not injured, but her face was a little pale. All of a sudden, rain started to fall. Both of their clothes were wet from the rain. It was winter and it snowed last night. But it rained in Chang'an today. The rain was very strange. Not only the time but also the pattern of the rain. The rain didn't fall anywhere else. Everywhere else in Chang'an was still snowing. Only the southern part of the Vermilion Bird Avenue was gradually soaked. Because the rain didn't come from the clouds, but from the sky. The snow melted by the fire turned into water and fell down, wetting the long street. Yu Lian looked at the other end of the street, feeling that the winter rain was a little cold. The smoke and dust from the collapsed houses along the street was gradually suppressed by the rain. The figure of the Abbey Dean appeared again. He threw the hilt in his hand into the snow pile by the street. His Taoist sword was smashed by the eldest brother's wooden stick. But other than that, he was not injured. His green robe was wet, but it was not blood. The Abbey Dean walked on the shallow snow. He walked in the wind and rain. Every step he took left a footprint on the snow. The rainwater falling from the sky accumulated into an ocean in that footprint. The small ocean was very calm, reflecting the scene in the sky like a mirror. Above Chang'an, the line of snow sky was still burning. Today is the New Year's Eve and the leader's birthday. Let's celebrate together. This scene is so beautiful. If I make a movie in the future, I must not delete this scene. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 780. The Abbey Dean entered Chang'an. Facing the powerhouses of the Academy and Huangyang, he extinguished the fire of blood on the Buddha beads, waved his sleeves and broke the divine demon realm, waved his hand to summon the Tianqi, and broke the 1,000-year city wall with a sword. The streets were filled with ruins, the snow in the sky was burning, and the raindrops kept falling. All of these scenes only proved one thing, and that was his strength. Cultivation in the human world was divided into 5 states. Crossing the highest threshold was the dream of countless people, but they could never reach the other shore. Over the years, few people in the cultivation world had passed the 5 states. Any one of them was already a legend or even a myth, such as the Tianqi state. However, today on the snowy street, the Abbey Dean waved his sleeves and performed the 4 legendary states, the Infinity, the Quietus, the Tianqi, and the Limitless state. And he did it so casually. The level the Abbey Dean showed was beyond the scope of the West Hill Classics and many other cultivation classics. It was beyond the most presumptuous imagination of cultivators. It even seemed unreal. The rain was still falling. He walked toward the north of the Vermilion Bird Avenue with a peaceful expression. The majestic power falling from the sky was injected into his body. With every step he took, he broke through the puddles of water and broke through the sunlight. His aura grew stronger. The cold rain slid down Yu Lian's face. She looked at the Abbey Dean who was walking in the rain and said, "It is said that 18 years ago, you came ashore and beat Wei Guangming down to the mortal world, removing him from the position of the divine priest of light." The Abbey Dean said, "That's right." Yu Lian said, "I didn't believe that you could beat a powerhouse of the Tianqi state back to his original state. Until now, I realize that you are more powerful than the legend says. The Abbey Dean walked slowly and said, being powerful is just a relative concept. I am stronger than you and Wei Guangming, but it doesn't mean I am powerful. Just like you are stronger than Xiong Chumo, it doesn't mean you are truly powerful. Yu Lian asked, then what is truly powerful? The Abbey Dean said, turning the relative into the absolute. That is truly powerful. Yu Lian asked, being stronger than everyone else is truly powerful? The Abbey Dean said, exactly. If you are invincible in the world, then you are naturally truly powerful. Yu Lian asked, do you think you are already invincible in the world? Crazy Ku is dead and the headmaster is gone. The Abbey Dean looked up at the raining sky and said, I have no choice but to be invincible. When he answered this question, his mood was very calm and steady, so it seemed very natural, as if he was talking about whose dishes were the best. Yu Lian said, since you're invincible in the world, why do you still want to cultivate the cultivation method of the Enlightenment sect? Abbey Dean is the leader of Taoism, but you are the enemy of Taoism. Don't you feel ashamed? She was referring to the Abbey Dean's eyes that turned gray when she punched. That was the gray eyes that were born out of the devil's great Taotai technique. The Abbey Dean said, everything in the world belongs to Haotian. Furthermore, you should understand that the Enlightenment doctrine still worships Haotian. Why can't I use it? The burning snow in the sky of Chang'an City was about to burn out. Therefore, the rain on the snowy street gradually lessened. The Abbey Dean walked to a side alley. There was a well at the entrance of the alley. The snow on the edge of the well had luckily avoided the erosion of the rain. It looked white and fluffy, very beautiful. Only then did Yu Lian loosen her grip. She had been holding the cotton-padded jacket on eldest brother's waist. When she was talking to the Abbey Dean, eldest brother did not participate, because he kept coughing and bleeding. His seriously injured body looked very weak. Yu Lian kept holding him because she knew that if she loosened her grip, eldest brother would forcibly enter the limitless state and continue fighting with the Abbey Dean at the risk of his life. Now she loosened her grip because eldest brother had a moment to rest. More importantly, it was because the Abbey Dean was close, and the battle between life and death was right in front of them. At this moment, a person suddenly climbed out of the ruined house by the street. It was a young man wearing a straw hat. He ran back from the West Hill, back to Chang'an, back to the academy. Thousands of miles of clouds, moon, dust, and soil had made him much thinner. He could no longer be described as chubby. He could only be described as burly. This was probably the description that a man should be. For many people, the Abbey Dean of the Jishou Abbey was already a legendary figure. The rain and snow in Chang'an today proved that the Abbey Dean was indeed a legend. But a legendary person was still a human being. The first words that came out of his mouth when he saw his only flesh and blood standing firm and unswerving in opposition to him were no different from those of the ordinary women in the stories. The Abbey Dean said, "Why do I only have you as my son?" Chen Pippi lifted a fallen wooden beam in front of him and walked to the middle of the street. He knelt down and said in a trembling voice, "Father, but I am also a student of the academy." The Abbey Dean looked at his son who was kneeling in the rain and said, "You are so weak. How can you choose a side?" Chen Pippi had been regarded as a genius of Haotian Taoism since he was a child. He was also the youngest cultivator to enter the knowing destiny state. But the three people on the street were all far stronger than him. The Abbey Dean was right. He said, "I always want to try." The Abbey Dean looked over Chen Pippi's head and fell on eldest brother who was covered in blood on the street. He said, "Is it worth it just to let your senior brother rest a little longer?" Chen Pippi said, "I just tried my best." The Abbey Dean said, "The academy deserves your best, but Haotian Taoism doesn't?" Chen Pippi did not turn back to look at eldest brother and third sister. But he knew that eldest brother had gone through 7 days of the most arduous pursuit, fighting against a stronger opponent, and was already exhausted and heavily injured. His senior sister's current condition was not much better. After a moment of silence, he said, "Since I tried my best, I must start from my heart." He did not directly answer his father's question, but he had already answered it. It was his heart that allowed him to break the tactical array of the Jisho Abbey so that eldest brother could come and go easily. It was also his heart that allowed him to rush back from the West Hill and confront his father on the street. The Abbey Dean's expression became calmer and calmer. He said, "I can give you no chance." Chin Pippi said, "Father, please give me one last chance. I have no other request." The Abbey Dean said, "After trying your best, you will have no second thoughts?" Chin Pippi said, "Exactly." The Abbey Dean said, "Very good." Chin Pippi stood up and wiped the rain and dirty water off his face. Then he slowly raised his arms. His fingers were slightly trembling. Because he was going to use the natural stream magical finger. Because his enemy was his father. Eldest brother wanted to stop the battle because he thought it was wrong to kill a father. Yulien only said one sentence to stop him. "If the academy is going to be destroyed, you must at least give Pippi a chance to try his best. Otherwise, how will he spend the rest of his life?" Chin Pippi used the academy's no-boundary intent to control the natural stream magical finger. The chi of the finger crisscrossed in the drizzle like a swallow returning to the woods. It was naughty and eager to go. It was pointing to the east, but the chi of heaven and earth condensed like a sharp blade, stabbing from the west. The finger was shaking like grass in the wind, but the finger intent was gentle and beautiful like a lotus leaf in the lake. The last time Chin Pippi used the natural stream magical finger was on a New Year's Day. That day, Sang Sang held the quilt and stood outside the back garden of the Chang, and local government. This was the second time he made a move in the truest sense. And it was also his most powerful attack. Facing the finger intent that broke through the rain, the Abbey Dean showed a gratified expression. This was what he had taught Chin Pippi. He was very satisfied with the state and ability that Chin Pippi had shown. So he was gratified and decided not to be too harsh on Chin Pippi. He reached out his index finger and pointed at the air. He decided not to kill his son. A gust of wind, the sound of rain, the sound of flute, and the sound of drums were heard. The finger intent that crisscrossed in the street was instantly broken into countless pieces. Several muffled sounds were heard. Chin Pippi fell into the rain, covered in blood. His limbs and joints were all injured by the finger intent. The bloody holes were ghastly and he looked extremely miserable. The Abbey Dean also used the natural stream magical finger. This was the real powerful natural stream magical finger. Chin Pippi couldn't move. He sat in the rain like a man before his execution, crying loudly. He was crying very sadly. "I am extremely tired. This chapter is only 2,500. Good night." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 781. The rain stopped. The snow in the sky had also been burned away, no longer falling. It was quiet on the street. Only the crying could be heard. Chin Pippi was like a child who had been wronged, sitting on the ground and crying out loud. He was just a child before his father and his senior brothers and sisters. The reason why he cried so sadly was complicated. But his father and his senior brothers and sisters knew it. Because what else could he do under such circumstances but cry? The Abbey Dean walked past him with his hands behind his back. He did not look at him, nor did he show any expression. Eldest brother sighed and said, "It's good that you can cry. At least you won't be depressed." Yulien frowned slightly. She looked at the other end of the street and said, "We are not dead yet. The academy is not dead yet. Why are you crying?" The Abbey Dean was walking toward them slowly. The power from Haotian poured into his body and made him stronger. But Yulien was right. She and the eldest brother were not dead yet. As long as they were not dead, the battle on the snow street was not over. The academy would still exist. The academy had to keep the Abbey Dean on the street to protect the array pivot of the god-stunning array and Chang'an. Unfortunately, eldest brother was not good at fighting. He was good at other things. The clear light on the snow street fell on his simple and amiable face and his old cotton jacket full of blood, making him look like a teacher who had just slaughtered a pig in the countryside. In fact, he had always been a teacher at the back of the mountain of the academy. Whether it was zither, chess, calligraphy, arrays, or music, those junior brothers and sisters who had supreme statuses in their respective fields were all his disciples. Therefore, he had abilities in these fields that ordinary people could never hope to achieve. Looking at the Abbey Dean walking slowly, he was like a teacher who always used the chalk as a weapon when he encountered a difficult problem. He naturally thought of the things that he had been in contact with over the years. Eldest brother thought of something and the wind came from the north of the city. It rolled up the snow on the street and blew the ruins of houses and collapsed eaves on both sides of the street. It blew everything that could be seen. The tiles trembled and made a deep sound like a stone bell. A broken banner of a restaurant danced in the cold wind and made a hissing sound like a broken zither. The wind passed through the cracks of the broken walls and sobbed like a flute. These broken, sentimental and sorrowful voices combined to form a weeping and complaining song. The song was not melodious, but full of sorrow. It came to the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean stopped and looked at the opposite side of the street. His expression turned solemn and he pointed. Eldest senior brother stretched out his hand towards the alleys beside the street and turned the countless streets and alleys in the south of the city into crisscrossing chess paths on the chessboard. He was the chess master beside the chessboard and instantly cut the finger intent into countless pieces. The Abbey Dean flicked his sleeves and messed up the crisscrossing chess Taoism. Then he stretched out his fingers. Eldest brother loosened his grip and threw the wooden stick onto the wet street in front of him. He didn't know Talisman Tao, so he didn't inherit the god-stunning array. However, he could use the chi of heaven and earth in this array. When the wooden stick fell, the 1,000-year-old city wall did not appear on the street again, only making a light pa sound. A soft sound came from the clouds above Vermilion Bird Avenue. Then there was a loud noise, countless loud noises. Countless bolts of lightning emerged from the clouds and struck down on the long street toward the Abbey Dean's body. These bolts of lightning were very dense and powerful. Even if the Abbey Dean entered the interlayer of the chi of heaven and earth with the limitless state, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't be hurt. The Abbey Dean's figure suddenly became faint. A bolt of lightning struck where he was standing just now. Smoke and dust filled the air, and there was a faint smell of burning. But it struck nothing. Countless bolts of lightning struck down one after another. The Abbey Dean's figure appeared again and then disappeared. He was like a clear and indifferent cloud, drifting in the lightning and thunder. It was impossible to catch him. Yulien disappeared from where she was. Cicadas chirped again on the long street. It was the angry chirping of thousands of cicadas. The wind and snow rose again. The angry chirping of cicadas was hidden in it, like tigers fighting for their lives. The accumulated snow on dozens of streets all floated up and poured into the Vermilion Bird Avenue. The world on the street became a world of wind and snow. It was hard to see what was happening inside. Only the sound of the finger intent piercing through the air, the sound of lightning striking down, and the increasingly shrill chirping of cicadas could be heard. The wind and snow were like smoke and dust. The long street was a battlefield. No matter how powerful the lightning and the chirping of cicadas were, they still couldn't suppress the finger intent. One finger was as silent as the abyss. One finger was as boundless as the sea. The finger intent could guard everything in the world and restrain everything in the world. The lightning slowed down and the cicadas mourned. The long street full of natural horrifying power was like a courtyard for the Abbey Dean. He walked out leisurely. The wind and snow calmed down. The last piece of snow drifted past the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean lost 3 fingers on his left hand. Blood was dripping onto the street. He glanced at the broken fingers. The bleeding gradually stopped, and the severed finger was smooth and sparkling like jade. He took out a handkerchief and wiped the blood off his palm. Then he put it back into his chest pocket and looked across the street. Yulien reappeared on the street without anyone noticing. Her face was pale. Although there were no obvious wounds, she had suffered severe internal injuries. Eldest brother was covered in blood. He was so tired that he was about to collapse. The winner had been decided. The Jisho Abbey was the holy land of Hautian Taoism. The name of this Taoist abbey came from a mantra in the West Hill scriptures. Knowing its masculinity and keeping its femininity was called the natural stream. That was how Chun Pippi's natural stream magical finger got its name. From this, one could imagine the supreme status of this set of finger art in Taoism. In the mantra in the West Hill scriptures there were a few more sentences. Knowing its black and keeping its white was called the world style. Knowing its glory and keeping its shame was called the world valley. This was the world of Hautian. If one could know everything in the world, he could keep everything in the world. No matter it was power or conscience. That was the true meaning of knowing and keeping. The Abbey Dean's finger intent was not only the natural stream magical finger, but also the world style and the world valley. He had crossed the threshold many years ago. He had mastered all kinds of methods and learned Taoism, Buddhism and Diabolism. He was even more powerful than Lien Xing and could be called the most powerful person in Taoism in the past 1,000 years. Unfortunately, he lived in the same era as the headmaster, Ku Haoran, and those two people were rare. That was why he was forced to keep a low profile for so many years. Now there was no headmaster in the human world. There was no Ku Haoran. He was the highest peak and the most powerful person in the human world. He was invincible in the world. So his finger was the world finger. The wind and snow started again. But this time, the wind and snow came from the heaven and earth and could not kill. Yulien looked at the Abbey Dean on the other side of the wind and snow and thought of what she had seen. She had mixed feelings. Eldest brother temporarily trapped the Abbey Dean with the sound of the broken house, the noise of the street and the power of the magnificent city. Then she used the angry cicada and was about to kill him, but the situation suddenly changed. The Abbey Dean looked at the wound of the broken finger and it looked like jade. She knew what was going on. This was the method of the devil's doctrine. Although it was not immortal, it was not far from it. If it was not so, her last piece of snow would have cut the Abbey Dean's body in half instead of only cutting off 3 of his fingers. She looked at the ordinary Taoist and thought of his ordinary name. She became serious. The leader of Taoism had cultivated the devil's doctrine to be more powerful than her, the headmaster. What kind of person was he? This is the world of Hautian. I follow the rules of Hautian, so all the rules of Hautian can be used by me. Unless you have the ability to challenge Hautian, you will never be able to defeat me. The Abbey Dean looked at the 2 people on the other side of the wind and snow and said calmly, "The 2 of you have brought me so much trouble. It is beyond my imagination. I even admire you. Li Man, if you were not so stupid to consume too much energy in these 7 days, and if you were not so stupid to not learn to fight for the first 10 years, maybe you could try to keep me here. Lin Wu, if you did not fight with Xiong Chumo a few days ago, maybe you could find some chance to kill me on the street today. But the possibility is still very small." The Abbey Dean looked at Yu Lien and said, "Since the traitor 1,000 years ago, you should be the most powerful headmaster of the devil's doctrine. You cultivated the 23-year cicada cultivation and integrated the divine demon realm, which helped you to create your own world. But it is a pity that your opponent is me. Just like how I was the most powerful person in Taoism for 1,000 years, but I met your master." The eldest brother said, "It was not until the Abbey Dean came to Chang and that I knew you had been waiting for time to pass. Because the God-stunning array could not be repaired, The power of the array was at its weakest. I should not have wasted these 7 days with you. But I have learned something during these 7 days. The Abbey Dean asked, "What is it?" The eldest brother said, "I can catch up with you now." The Abbey Dean said, "I was chasing you a few days ago. Now you are chasing me. What's the point?" The eldest brother said, "As long as I can catch up with you, we will have the chance to leave together." The Abbey Dean said, "I understand what you mean. But it is a pity that you are seriously injured now. It is difficult for you to catch up with me. And most importantly, you have no power." He looked at the senior brother and sister from the academy and said, "Now that I think about it, my admiration for the headmaster of the academy has deepened. He was able to teach you too. If you two were one person, I would not be a match for you. Fortunately for me, the two of you could not become one." Julien said, "I want to see if I can exchange 2 lives for one of yours." The Abbey Dean said, "Even though you have cultivated the 23-year cicada cultivation and become a woman, and have studied under the headmaster for many years, you are still the headmaster of the devil's doctrine. It is ridiculous to say such impassioned words." Julien said, "This has nothing to do with impassioned words. It is related to happiness. My master has always taught me that life is to find happiness and peace. If I can kill you, I will be very happy." The Abbey Dean said calmly, "That makes sense. So I will not give you such a chance." Even though he was invincible in the world, he did not want to fight with the 2 powerhouses of the academy when the outcome was already decided. Because there were countless possibilities before death. He came to Chang not to kill, but to destroy the array. As long as he could destroy the god-stunning array, the show would come to an end. In the wind and snow, cicadas suddenly chirped and then disappeared. The Abbey Dean's figure disappeared in the wind and snow. The god-stunning array was damaged, and the 2 from the academy were seriously injured. No one could stop him. Thank you for your understanding. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 782. Thank you to the reviews and comments section and friends everywhere for your medical answers. I have received all of them. I will take good care of myself. After the meeting at the end of the month and return to the Qing Kingdom, I will exercise with the leaders. I will live well and right for another 40 years. Please take care of me these days." The Abbey Dean's figure disappeared in the wind and snow. Eldest brother swayed slightly, as if he was about to fall and walk. More blood seeped out of his old cotton gown. At this moment, Julien reached out and hooked his belt around his waist. She shook her head. "He's right," Julien said. "Even if you try your best to catch up with him, I can't. It's still meaningless. Even if you want to leave Chang and with him, you can't." Eldest brother said tiredly, "Then what should we do?" Julien said, "Since we can't catch up with him, we can only wait for him to be stopped." Eldest brother said, "Who can stop the Abbey Dean now?" Julien said, "Chang'an." Eldest brother looked at the crack in the clouds above Vermilion Bird Avenue and said, "The city has been broken. It's just a crack." Julien said, "When the crack is sewn up, we can come together." Eldest brother said, "It's not appropriate to let youngest brother bear such heavy pressure." Julien said, "Although he's still very weak now, the city belongs to him since Master has given it to him. That's the pressure he should bear." Eldest brother said, "Then we wait? Rest." Julien loosened eldest brother's belt and held his arm, helping him walk to the side of the street. Chen Pippi squatted on the rubble by the street, his eyes red and swollen like rotten peaches on the West Hill. Julien said, "Come and help him." Chen Pippi quickly wiped the tears off his face and came to help. There were ruins on both sides of the street. There was a sturdy silver building, only half of which had collapsed, with some broken eaves that could shelter them from the snow and rain. The 3 sat under the eaves, waiting for the final outcome. The chirping of cicadas in winter gradually quieted down. The snow rose again in the morning and danced with the wind. The dry snowflakes fell on the street and were blown by the cold wind. There seemed to be countless salt crystals rolling on the straight vermilion bird avenue. In the wind and snow, the Abbey Dean's figure was as small as a flying swan, or as inconspicuous as a snowflake. However, Chang-un was, after all, the god-stunning array left by the headmaster, so he was soon found. Countless houses in the 365 streets and alleys in the eastern city, as well as countless bricks and stones, all sensed the arrival of the Abbey Dean. An ancient aura emanated from the cracks of the bricks and the moss and snow. The 5 lakes in the western part of the city had also sensed the arrival of enemies in Chang'an. The surface of the lakes that were covered with ice and snow began to shake slightly, and hot springs began to gush out from the rocks in the depths of the lake. When the thin snow fell on the city wall of Chang'an, the magnificent city sensed the arrival of the enemy. This was the most powerful enemy it had encountered in the past 1,000 years. Countless auras rose from the imperial palace, from the government offices, from the residences, from the lakes, mountains, wells, and trees. The aura of heaven and earth above the grand city suddenly underwent an extremely violent change. The low and heavy snow clouds rolled restlessly, instantly covering the crack in the clouds above the vermilion bird avenue, perfectly blocking the majestic power cast down from the sky. The Abbey Dean looked up at the sky and confirmed that the Tianqi was blocked again. Then he looked around Chang'an and sensed the terrible power contained in those auras. But he still looked calm and continued to walk north. Because he was walking on the Vermilion Bird Avenue, walking on the damaged part of the city. The snow on the Vermilion Bird Avenue had been blown to the sides and piled up into knee-high piles. It looked like the 1,000-mile city wall of the Yen Kingdom against the eastern wilderness. The Vermilion Bird in the middle of the street was very clear. The Abbey Dean walked past the Vermilion Bird. The Vermilion Bird suddenly opened its eyes. They were lively and violent, as if it was about to become a living creature. The Abbey Dean turned to the Vermilion Bird and said, "Evil creature." In the eyes of the Vermilion Bird, there was a struggling emotion, but it turned dark because of fear. The Vermilion Bird was a killing talisman in the god-stunning array. Its power was equal to a full blow from a cultivator at the peak of the knowing destiny state. Even cultivators who had passed the threshold of the 5 states and Liu Bai would be afraid of it. But the Abbey Dean just said one sentence indifferently. The Vermilion Bird turned dark. The array in Chang'an was like an iron curtain that had covered the sky in the human world for 1,000 years. Even though the Abbey Dean was the most powerful cultivator in Haotian Taoism in the past 1,000 years, he could not tear the iron curtain with his own power. However, as long as one had enough time, one would be able to accumulate enough power. The Tao sect used 1,000 years and finally tore a hole in this iron curtain. The Abbey Dean continued to walk like an immortal. The doors of the houses along the street were closed. Some people looked at the street through the cracks of the doors. They looked at the Taoist in indigo who looked like an immortal, and their eyes were full of fear and despair. Since the early morning, the bells in Chang'an had been ringing and the snow was burning. Everyone in the city knew what was happening. But in the face of a battle that was beyond the 5 states, secular power was meaningless. He approached the North City. The side of the street suddenly opened up. A large meadow covered with thin snow added a sense of tranquility to the dozens of small buildings and the winter forest. It was the military ministry of the Tang Empire. If it was a normal war, the military ministry of the Tang Empire behind the snow-covered meadow would definitely be the place that the enemy wanted to destroy the most. But the Abbey Dean did not even look at it. He looked at the buildings in the north quietly. That majestic and magnificent imperial city. His destination was the small building in the imperial palace. He wanted to destroy the god-stunning array under the small building. He was the only one who could do it. The Abbey Dean started to walk forward. Suddenly, his footsteps returned to their original position. He looked at the wind and snow in front of him and slightly raised his eyebrows. The wind and snow suddenly rose and then gradually condensed into two traces. The Abbey Dean's expression gradually became serious. The two traces condensed by the wind and snow were very strange. They were suspended in the air, neither dispersing nor falling. It was like someone had written two strokes in the air. It was not ink but snow. Ning Ke had already woken up after meditating for a night by the Yinming Lake. When he woke up, his clothes and the lake and mountains around him had been covered by the first snow. It was a vast expanse of whiteness. He stood up. The snow rustled down. He stood by the cliff and looked at the snow lake. He held the Array-I pestle in his hand. He looked at the snow lake and then at Chang'an City. He saw the snow falling like a curtain in the south of Chang'an City. He saw the snowflakes burning in the sky like fire. He saw the street in the winter rain. He saw the Taoist in indigo floating like an immortal and arriving at the imperial city in a moment. He suddenly reached his hand behind his shoulder and pulled out the cold hilt of his padao. Then he chopped down. The padao chopped down casually. There were two swishing sounds. Two clear marks appeared on the snow lake. The next moment the two marks disappeared from the snow lake. He fled between the heavens and earth, his whereabouts unknown. The two marks he made on the snow lake came to the Vermilion Bird Avenue. They came to the front of the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean looked serious. He stopped. Two marks, one stroke and the other stroke. They formed a simple and sharp word. It was E. It looked like the cross of a sword and a knife. It meant that the grass was cut silently. And there was a meaning that even a child could understand. This road is blocked. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.